IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast. National Championship Week edition, still a beautiful ring to it. Love saying it every single time. But we are now 5 days out from Notre Dame taking on the Ohio State Buckeyes down in Atlanta in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Winner takes all, winners crowned the national champions. So we are going to continue diving into our preview of this matchup today, Brian. We are now going to talk about the Notre Dame offense and the Ohio State defense. Yesterday, we covered the exact opposite in the Ohio State offense. So we got a lot of stuff to cover today, man. We're going to talk about Notre Dame's offense, big picture. Is this going to be the moment in the game where they finally step up? Then we're going to dive into a preview of the Ohio State defense, right? We're going to talk about what's made them good throughout the course of the season. What are some areas where Notre Dame might potentially match up well? What are some areas of concern a little bit, right? And then we're going to talk through statistics and stacking it up on paper. And then we're going to go and finally we're going to wrap this up with diving into the matchups that matter, right? We're going to talk through where are the areas that Notre Dame has to win. And like we talked about yesterday, winning looks a little bit different when you get to this stage, right? So where are the areas that Notre Dame has to win in? And I don't know about you, Brian. I do know about you, Brian. We're both pumped up for this, man. I mean, we're 5 days out. It feels like this is going to be a really long 5 days, but doing stuff here and getting to talk to everybody here in the chat and you and I getting to break it down over the next couple of days is going to make everything just go by a little bit quicker, man.
I mean, look, I usually the way I'm feeling today, bro, I'm checking out. I'm like, look, I'm resting. I'm saving my voice. I'm sick as a dog. But I've already done one show this morning, national show. I got you. We are doing our show. I got another one tonight, man, because I am so excited about this football game. And just because there's so much opportunity for Notre Dame to prove, we've talked about to kind of slay those dragons and kill those narratives. And this show is especially going to be fun because this is the side of the ball that's been the primary factor for so long. And I know we're going to dive into that too. But, I mean, look, this is what you play for. This is what you practice for. This is what the team goes through the morning AM workouts in the winter for, in the middle of the winter, last January. This is what they go through spring ball for. This is why they spend, those hot summer hours working their tails off. This is why you bang every day in practice. And this it's all to be on this stage. Right, when you're at Notre Dame, it's to be on this stage, and it's not been easy. They've had to overcome a lot of adversity, including a bad loss, but most of the adversity has been through injuries and departures, and it hasn't been a clean year for Ohio State either. They haven't had as many injuries as Notre Dame, but their offensive line doesn't look like it was supposed to look like, and yet this team still keeps finding ways to win, and they got to do it one more time, you're trying to prove yourself to be king of the North, as we said yesterday. Beating 3 Big Ten teams on your way to a title is what you need to accomplish. And so we're going to have some fun talking about that, man. But, yeah, I've got a lot more on the plate, right? I mean, so this week with different things to talk about. But I'm excited about it, and I think this team's got a shot to go out there and win this game. And that's the big thing. It's just, it's not one where it's like, okay, they got to do all these things perfect. This got to do this, hope this happens. You got to go play your game, and that's true for the offense. And of course, today we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about that, and I'm excited about it. And Trev, you even said to me before the show, like, this is the matchup that I really am looking forward to talking about.
Yeah, I mean, this is it, right? The thing that I've loved about Notre Dame's postseason run up to this point is they've been almost the narrative killer, right? Leading up into the national championship, right? I mean, they've been narrative killers since after September 7th. Right. They had the bulk of their schedule ahead of them. There's no way, like, Notre Dame has been playing in elimination games after that home loss to Northern Illinois. And there's people that, there's no way that they can rip off 10 games straight without losing. And they did. And then you get into the playoffs, like, this is kind of a stage where we've seen Notre Dame falter and we've seen Notre Dame slip up. I know the final score was 27-17. But they held a 27-3 lead with 6 minutes left in that football game, man. I mean, that game was over once the fourth quarter started, and I think we can all kind of agree on that. All the momentum was wearing blue and gold. Then you get to the Georgia stage, and you get to that New Year's Six Bowl stage where Notre Dame hasn't been able to conquer that dragon, right? They haven't been able to win that New Year's Six Bowl in over 30 years, and they did that. right? And then a lot of the question was, how was Notre Dame going to handle success? Were they going to be able to go into the Orange Bowl against a hot, really good Penn State football team and win, right? Were they going to be able to do the things necessary to advance themselves to the national championship? And you guys have seen it. You see what the national narratives are, right? You guys see, well, Notre Dame can't win this one, and Notre Dame can't get past this team. And there's no way with all of their injuries, they're going to make it past this next opponent. And here they are 15 games later, gearing up to play for a national championship here in about 5 days. Now, the biggest key heading into all that, which Brian and I are getting ready to break down today, is the Notre Dame offense. This is the side of the ball for Notre Dame that has been a lot of this, right? It's been up and down. And when it's up, that offense is really good. And this is a really hard football team to stop. But we've seen at times when it struggles, it goes on scoring droughts, right? Yeah. You get the Orange Bowl, and they didn't score their first points on the board until there were 17 seconds left on the clock. But then started to roll. They scored 24 points in the second half. So really, the Orange Bowl was almost a microcosm of what the Notre Dame offense has been all season long. We just got to witness it in about 60 minutes because what's a Notre Dame postseason game without a little bit of a heart attack, right? But Notre Dame's offense is going to be something that's going to be interesting to talk about today because to me, they hold a major key, not the only one, but the major key to downing an Ohio State football team because in their previous 2 matchups, that is the side of the ball that was not up to par with what Notre Dame needed, right? That's the side of the ball that in 2022 only put up 10 points. That was the side of the ball in 2022 that went scoreless in the second half and went 3 of 13 on third down. And then in 2023, it was almost the opposite, right? You had an offense that went scoreless the entire first half, and they weren't able to jump out and capitalize. So is this going to be the performance where they put everything together, Brian? I don't know about you, but I'm ready to dive into this thing, man.
Let's go. I mean, it's not just against Ohio State, Trevor, that the offense has fallen short. It's been every time they've gotten on this stage for the most part. I mean, there's been few exceptions, right? 2012 Oklahoma, 2020 Clemson. Yeah, I think that's the list of games where the offense prior to this year has done what's needed. I actually throw Penn State into that category of the offense stepped up.
Yeah.
And scored 27 points against a really good defense. But is that the anomaly or is that just who Notre Dame is now? And that's really what we're going to find out because I think Penn State's a really good defense. I think Ohio State's is a little bit better. You know, statistically, it's been better. They played better in the matchup between the two teams. I mean, Penn State's defense gave up 20 points to Ohio State. Ohio State's defense gave up 6 points to Penn State. You know what I mean? Like they're to me, them and Notre Dame have been the 2 best defenses in college football this year. But like, Trevor, let's go all the way back to, I mean, gosh, since Notre Dame's last title, you've got 05 USC and 2012, Oklahoma is the exceptions. 2020 Clemson, when Clemson was missing 3 of their best defensive players and their star quarterback in that game as well. It's been, 2006 LSU Sugar Bowl offense gets obliterated. You look at, 2012, how many games defense had to just carry that team in some big games. You beat Michigan 13-6 that year. You talk about the offense just not being able to do anything against Alabama in 2012. You think of the Ohio State game in 2015, you fall behind 28-7. Now the offense was able to kind of rally back a little bit and make it 28-21, and then you faltered. But your struggles it was part of the reason Ohio State was able to kind of jump up to that lead. That and the fact that your head coach hired Brian McGorder as defensive coordinator, that didn't help either against a really, really talented Ohio State team. 2017, your offense couldn't get it done against Georgia. They sucked against Miami in that game in 2017. And, you look at 2019, against Michigan, big stage, against Georgia on a big stage, the offense falters. 2020 in the AFC, the ACC championship game, your offense doesn't show up. In the semifinal, the Rose Bowl, the offense doesn't show up. I mean, this has kind of been the story, right? 2021 against Cincinnati, your offense stinks. I mean, it's every time you get on this big stage, for the most part, with very, very few exceptions, your offense is the side of the ball that lets you down. And I don't know that I think the offense did what they needed to do in the first 2 rounds. And I think when they got that lead on Georgia in the second half, I think Mike Denbrock was like, look, we're not going to do anything to let Georgia get a short field and get back in this game because I don't think they can score more than 17 points against our defense, like from here on out. Smart game plan. Against Penn State, they had to step up and carry the day because their play was a part of the reason their name was down 10-0, to be honest with you. And they stepped up big in the second half and made some big-time plays. I mean, moved the ball 261 yards in the second half against Penn State. In the last 31 and a half minutes of the game, they had over 300 yards of offense and scored 27 points. All right, okay, great. That's cool, but can you continue that now again in this championship game? That's going to be the key because this is the side of the ball that has let them down so many times in the past. And I know you can't hold this group accountable for that. I mean, I get that. I mean, I think the offense did what they needed to do in the fourth quarter against Texas A&M on the road. Like, that was important. I mean, it was a 13-3 going into the fourth quarter. You scored 10 points in the fourth quarter to win that football game. You know, the offense does what it needs to do to jump all over Louisville. So we've seen this group step up. USC game, you know, USC's Notre Dame's defense is struggling against USC. Offense steps up and carries them a little bit. You know, so we've seen this group do that before. But this is the best defense they will have faced, in my opinion. So it's like, okay, yeah, you did it against those teams where you had better players than that team. And we said going into the game, Notre Dame's got better players than Georgia. Not at every single spot, but overall I felt they had the better team, and they proved it that day. This is the first time you're going up against a team that you don't, across the board, have better players. And there's some spots where they're better, and there's a lot of spots where Ohio State's better. But this is the one where it's like, okay, you got to be on top of your game if you're going to win this. I just don't see Notre Dame. You don't want to get into a 17-14 game again. If they do that and win, I don't care. But I'm just saying it's unlikely to me that you're just going to be able to hold this team to 17 to 21 points again. You know, I mean, if you can, great. But you as an offense can't prepare that way. You can't prepare like, no, we only got to get to 17 and we're going to 18. We're going to be fine. No, you got to be like, hey, look, we got to try to get to 30 and not put our defense in that kind of bind. Are they capable of doing it? We'll see. But they're going to need to. They're going to need a big performance from this Notre Dame offense.
Yeah, man. I mean, big picture, this is the side of the football that has kind of held down the narrative of Notre Dame being able to compete in these big games, right? Because you go through and you look at what the defense has done, especially under Freeman's tenure. But no matter what, Notre Dame's getting ready to play for a national championship, and there are still people who believe that Notre Dame can't compete at this level, even though they just watched them win 2 New Year's Six bowls against the SEC champs and the Big Ten runner-ups within 7 days of each other, right? But it's because the offense doesn't look the way that they do, right? Or the way that what most people believe championship contending offenses look like, right? Because Denbrock is calling the game very specific to what the offense needs to do in that game, right? You go through and you look at how they finished against Georgia. You know, you can go through and look at, you know, what they did in the second half against Penn State. And really throughout the course of the season, Notre Dame's offense just played to the level that they needed to, which has been sometimes frustrating as somebody that is a fan, that analyzes the team, because you see the potential. You can see them rattle off 21 points in one quarter against a quality defense. You see them put up 35 points against USC in 3 quarters. But sometimes, especially when you have a defense as good as Notre Dame's, the offense will just kind of the game will dictate what the offense needs to do, right? But in a national championship game like this against an Ohio State team where both sides of the football are very good, right? It can't be, well, we'll just see what the game dictates, because if you go into it with that mentality, the game is then going to dictate. You now have to dig yourself out of another deficit, potentially double-digit deficit in back-to-back games, right? We saw Notre Dame do that one time this year. That doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence that it's like, oh, they can just do it again against a defense that from top to bottom is better than Penn State's defense, right? And so it's going to be something that starting fast is going to obviously be a huge key. Every single game, it's for a different reason. But to me, this is what holds down the narrative for Notre Dame and them being able to compete at the championship level. Right. I mean, if you go back and look at Ohio State, it's not like Ohio State is competing for national championships every single year. Right. The last time they made a national championship appearance, they got blown out by Alabama. Right. You know, in 2022, when they were in the playoffs, they lost to Georgia in a shootout. but nobody cares about that because the offense looked awesome. Right? Ohio State's always in that conversation because they have, rightfully so, but they have Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Emeka Igbukas and the Jackson Smith and Jigbas, and now they have the Jeremiah Smiths. And so for Notre Dame, that's what kind of holds it down. That's why when they get to this stage, it's, Notre Dame's going to score 10 points because their offense sucks. Like that's unfortunately what some of the takeaways have been.
Well, and to a degree, part of that's justified too, because what Ohio State can say is like, listen, I could sit here and talk about like, why are we assuming that Ohio State is going to like play great in this game and step up in a big moment? Because as you mentioned, last time they were in the playoff, they missed a field goal and kind of choked away a big lead in the game, right? I mean, they did. They had a pretty good lead on Georgia and lost it, right? And you look at you mentioned 2020 when they got blown out by Alabama. That was a big one. By the way, it was 21-7. They had a 21-7 second quarter lead on Georgia, and then they had a 38-24 lead going into the fourth quarter against Georgia and lost that football game. And then you look at getting blown out by Alabama. It was 35-17 at halftime. You look at 2016 against Clemson, they lost 31-0. So why do we have this narrative about Ohio State is going to, do this or this, in the college football playoff? Well, because I also remember watching that offense against Alabama in 2014. And I remember watching Ezekiel Elliott just rip Alabama apart. And I watched that offense score 42 points and have over 500 yards of offense. I then I then went and watched them score 42 points in the national title game against Oregon. So like they're going to get that benefit of the doubt because of that. But then there's also been some games, as you mentioned, Trevor, where the offense has stepped up and scored points. And the thought is, and it's true, that the defense now is way better than it was in 2022 against Georgia and in 2020 against Alabama for Ohio State. And it is. And so that's where I think a lot of the narrative comes from. But at least there are games you can point to and say that one side of the ball stepped up and played well.
Sure.
And notice, hey, well, I'll pull a Brian Kelly. Well, we never got shut out in the playoff game. We scored 3. That's and Ohio State did get shut out in the playoff game. But who cares? A loss is a loss. And in this instance, I don't think either one of these teams are those teams. But to your point, that narrative doesn't exist about Ohio State's offense in big games. They don't look at it and remember what happened in 2020. They don't remember what happened in 2019 when the offense, had a chance to win that game against Clemson and couldn't get it done in the playoff, which was a great game, by the way.
Yeah.
Then they blew was it 16-0 lead against Clemson in that game. Nobody talks about that. It's always Notre Dame's failures. It's never anybody else's failures. And you know what? That's fine because Ohio State still has things they can point to. Until this year, Ohio State had multiple playoff wins. They won 2 in 14. They won 1 in 20. And that's really one of the differences. But there are things I can point to and say, hey, look, this is what this offense has done at times. And now they have a defense to back them up. That's where it comes from. So yes, it's frustrating that narrative doesn't exist, but Ohio State has a lot more moments of, well, we stepped up in this moment. Notre Dame has almost none. And none on this stage.
Right.
I can point to a regular season game here and a regular season game there, but not on this stage. Last week was the first time that happened. And now you're going to say, okay, now you have to do it again against an even better defense. And when you compare the two, I think Penn State's got the better defensive line. No disrespect to Ohio State. They're excellent as well, but that Penn State D-line is legit. I think Ohio State's better linebacker and Ohio State's better in the secondary.
Yeah.
Comparing the two. And again, the gap between the two D-lines is like this, in my opinion. And if somebody wanted to argue with me that Ohio State's better, I'm not going to argue with them about it. I think Penn State's better, but it's like, I don't think you're nuts for saying Ohio State's is better. So that's kind of where I'm at, Trev, is like, I get the narrative.
Yeah.
It's frustrating that it's not applied evenly, but I get the narrative. But this is what's so great about this opportunity for the Notre Dame offense is, okay, well, this is what you want. This is your opportunity to kill that narrative, to end that narrative. And this is your chance to prove like, hey, we can get it done on the big stage.
Yeah.
And what does that mean, Trev? Does that mean, okay, they got to score 40? I don't care about all that. I care about making winning plays. if you only score 17 points, but in the fourth quarter you make that big play to win the game, hey, all right. I mean, last year, if all the offense does is convert one more first down and not give up that drive and then just run the clock out and win 14-10, I'm going to be like, dude, you did what you needed to do. You fell behind 10-0. You scored 14 unanswered points. Game was on the line. You converted first downs. You ran the clock out. Ohio State got the ball back with 30 seconds, and your defense ended it. That's getting the job done. It doesn't have to be scoring 40. It means you got to do enough and make the plays needed to outscore your opponent. And you can't win in spite of your offense. That's really where we're at, because I don't think you can beat Ohio State in spite of your offense. I mean, maybe they get a couple pick sixes, but you can't expect that, Trev. I mean, you can't. Your offense needs to step up and play well. And honestly, this is what you brought Mike Denbrock in here for. And that kind of leads into my next point, Trevor, is I think that's also this offense isn't getting as much respect as it deserves. I mean, they have scored more points per game than Ohio State. And I heard Curt Cignetti was talking about, and it was actually a very fair analysis. I'm not banging on Curt Cignetti for saying this, but he talked about, he mentioned that Notre Dame scores more points than Ohio State. And I was like, all right, respect, coach. Like, you're nailing that one. But then he goes, but they get a lot of defensive touchdowns. And I'm like, okay. Notre Dame has, what do they have on the year? 7 defensive or special teams touchdowns? 7, right?
Yes.
I think Ohio State has 5, right? So they have a punt return for touchdown against Indiana. They have an interception return, and they have 3 fumble returns for touchdowns. They have 5. So Notre Dame's still scoring more points per game if you take away the defensive and special teams touchdowns. So, but the narrative is still that Ohio State's way better on offense. And I kind of understand why. That when they're on, they've done really well against some really good teams, and Notre Dame hasn't scored. I mean, Notre Dame's scoring in the 20s every week, and they're scoring in the 40s in the playoff. I get it. But this is what this game can do, is it can say, okay, now you earn your respect. But I do think that this offense is not getting enough respect coming into this game, but you're either going to prove that disrespect as being valid because you don't play well in this game, or you say, you guys were wrong. We are better than what you think we are. And our numbers throughout the course of the season prove that.
I think, for Notre Dame, the issue that they've had on offense over the last, really up until the playoffs, is they haven't won the moments. That regular season and in the postseason is the moments that you needed your offense to step up and make a play. 2023 Ohio State, 2021 Oklahoma State. Yeah, there's so many examples. 2019
Georgia, 2017 Georgia.
Literally.
Right.
And so in the moments that you needed your offense to step up and make those plays, they didn't. But what have they done in the play? They've done that. And I said this at the start of the playoffs. Doesn't matter if you win 41-17 or 21-20 or 27-24. You
don't care if they win 2-0. I don't even care. Just yes.
Right. And so for Notre Dame, one thing that they have done in the playoffs is in the moment, even if it hasn't been as sexy on film and if it hasn't been that fun to watch, they've performed and executed for the most part in the moments that they needed to. Notre Dame's offense for most of the Georgia game was dormant, right? Like it just had no momentum, nothing really going for it. But in the time when they needed to put the game away and put it out of reach, you go on a 7.5-minute drive. You know what I mean?
But they even stepped up before that. It's like when your defense, you did get that late field goal drive to tie the game, and then another to take the lead. People forget, even before the strip sack, Notre Dame had just taken a lead against Georgia. It was 6-3, but your offense was kind of starting to, move the ball a little bit, and then the run game was starting to get going a little bit, and you had taken a 6-3 lead. Your defense forced the big play. You still had to punch it in the end zone against a really good Georgia defense, and you did. So even and then you made the plays in the fourth quarter to move the chains and run the clock out. So yes, you are correct, Trev. But I even think the offense did some things earlier in that game to step up. Now that doesn't mean they played well.
Sure.
But they at least did what they needed to do in those moments. And that's, to your point, that's what they had failed to do in the 2 previous games against Georgia, when the offense had the ball in the fourth quarter with a chance to win the game, and they couldn't get it done. Twice against Georgia before.
Yeah, and talking fairly on both sides of the ball here, that's what impressed me about Ohio State's offense in the Texas game, because they didn't, right? Like they didn't put up the 42 and 41 points that they put up in the first round and in the Rose Bowl. But what they did do is they responded in every moment that they needed to respond, right? At the end of the half, Georgia started to get a little bit of momentum. So what do? You execute a perfectly called screen pass to Travion Henderson. It goes 75 to the house. Momentum is back with the Scarlet and Gray. Texas drives down. They tie the football game. Momentum's starting to swing over to them. And they go on like a 14-play drive to take the lead 21-14, right? So, again, Ohio State's offense did what they needed to, but not a lot of people are talking about. They're talking about, Jack Sawyer's strip sack, and it's an 83-yard touchdown fumble return to ice the game, which was a fantastic play. But it's kind of the same thing. Because they didn't put up 40 points, not a lot of people are talking about the offense outside of that screen pass, right? It's because Jeremiah Smith got held to 1 catch for 3 yards, and they didn't put up 40 points.
They had so many penalties. I mean, there's always these excuses for why they didn't score in that game.
Right.
So if it wasn't for all the penalties, they'd have scored 40 on Texas.
Right.
Well, isn't that kind of part of being good?
Right.
Is like not committing those penalties and not having those mistakes.
Right. But for Notre Dame, now they have an opportunity to, if it's people that track the game like we do, and like I know a lot of, IB Nation does, and they watch how these games unfold, Notre Dame's offense is earning more and more respect from everybody game over game, right? Because of the second half performance, really the last 31 and a half minutes of the Penn State game, because of the responses that they've had. On the first drive against IU, tip pass, intercepted. Momentum starts to go to IU. Next drive, 1 play, 98-yard touchdown on the number 1 rushing defense in the country at that time, right? And
then the next drive after that, you went 9 minutes. You had the ball for over 9 minutes.
Yes.
And ran it on. I mean, it was 3 yards, 4 yards. Janarian busts the 20, and you pounded them to take a 14-0 lead against the number 1 rush defense. Well, they were the number 1 rush defense in the country, but they're not anymore. Why? Actually, they still are. Ohio State's 3rd. They still are, but they're 0.2 ahead of Ole Miss. But they went down 10 yards. Their average went from 70 to 80 because Notre Dame ran for over 190 on them.
Yep. So they have another opportunity in front of them to continue to prove that narrative wrong and to continue to earn the respect of more national pundits, honestly, even some Notre Dame fans. There are some Notre Dame fans that don't believe this offense really still isn't worth its salt. And
yeah. But I get it. I mean, that's the thing is, Trevor, I
say.
Get it. Go ahead, bro. Sorry.
No, you're good, man. We're on the same page. It's frustrating to a degree because of some of the things that they've done in the playoffs, but I understand where it's coming from because in these games, the offense hasn't shown up. Right? They haven't had that performance. They haven't had the performance of every single time they touch the ball, the opposing defense is like, oh my gosh, we got to find a way to keep these guys from scoring. Most of the time, it's the exact opposite. It's Notre Dame fans jumping up and down in their living room, staring at the TV, begging the offense to just not go 3 and out. You know what I mean? So I understand it, right? And some of the performances in the playoffs, I get it. Horrible outside of the last minute and a half. Not good on offense against Penn State. Can happen against a team like Ohio State. You can't bank on Ohio State electing to kick a 20-yard, basically extra point field goal instead of going for it on 4th down. You can't bank on that. So it's Notre Dame's offense has to step up. I'm absolutely in agreement with you. I understand where it comes from, but now they have the opportunity to continue to earn the respect of not just national media and pundits around the country, but from their own fan base as well, right? Which is a really exciting opportunity that they have in front of them, Brian.
It is. This, as we said, this team has just been a narrative killer all year. They got one more they got to do, right? I mean, don't play well in this game, and a lot of that stuff about the offense comes right back up. And again, justifiably. I mean, it'd be another big game that you didn't play well. And, we'll see how it goes. Now, then you get into the question of let's kind of talk a little bit more specific about it, Trev. Can they score? And we'll dive into specifics of it, but can they score? And the answer to that is yes, they can move the ball and score in this Ohio State defense. But what does that look like? It's more about like, look, you gotta get to like 24, 27, is I think, where you need to be, maybe 30. Can they do that? Sure. But you're gonna have to play really well. And you're gonna have to play really well in all phases. And that means twofold. Units have to play well, O-line, receivers, running backs, quarterback, but then also in situational stuff, which we'll get into a little bit. But that's the thing is, look, this is a beat up football team. I'm not saying this to make an excuse. This is just reality. You're not going to get you're not going to get spotted 10 because you've got more injuries than Ohio State. It's going to start 0-0, and Ohio State's not going to have any sympathy for you. But you just get to the point where we keep asking ourselves, at what point does it just, all right, this is just the one that can't get past? Is Anthony Knapp that one? I think it'd be more of a combination of all of them. It's Anthony Knapp now, plus not having Benjamin Morrison, plus not having Riley Mills, plus not having Patojo, plus not having Boubacar. It's just kind of not having Jeremiah Love being 100%. I mean, they just all kind of pile up after a while. But you know what? You've continued to overcome it. You've continued to win through it, and you've got one more left. I mean, that's where they're at. But this is not a situation where they've got to play out of their minds to get to 20. It's got to play their game. I was asked on the show today, like, what gives you confidence about Notre Dame? And I said, what can they do to win? I said, just play your game. This is the first time you've been on the stage where it's not like you need a Herculean effort to get to 20 points. You just got to play your game, meaning you don't got to, hope that they struggle and hope they make a bunch of – you force them to make mistakes, with a good game plan and execution. And you just got to come out and play well. O-line's just got to do what they've done in some of these games. I mean, we've seen them run the ball well against good teams. They got to step up and play well. We've seen Riley throw the ball well against some good teams. So we've seen him not throw the ball well against some good teams. Just got to play your game, and that's the big key. Will they play their game? That we don't know. We'll find out on Monday. But I do think going into this breakdown in this matchup, we're going to talk a lot about the Ohio State defense, and it's going to sound very glowing because it is. This is a great defense. But this is a defense that I do think that Notre Dame can have some success against, and we'll try to define what success against them looks like. But you're going to have to play well. You're going to have to earn it against this defense. There's no question about it, Trev.
Yeah, look, man, there's no little sprinkle of magic that Notre Dame needs to compete in this football game, which is the first time in my lifetime I've been able to say that at a stage. I mean, to be fair, this is only the second national championship that I've witnessed in my lifetime for Notre Dame. But outside of the 2012 game, like you don't need this magical, like a leprechaun comes down and you just have the luck of the Irish all game long, and you just have to hope and pray that Ohio State just has the worst game defensively that they've had in 2 years, right? Like it's nothing like that. But for me, can they? Absolutely. And the biggest way to get there is you can't be going on these droughts. I've been saying it all year long that it's a lot of this, and Notre Dame's offense is a lot of this, and it's very rhythm-based. And sometimes that's within the same game. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they come out in the first quarter, and you're just like, yo, Notre Dame might put up 50 against a good opponent. I felt that way after the first quarter of the Louisville game, and I was like, whoa.
And if they wanted to score more in the second half, they could have.
Yeah.
You felt that way against Navy. I felt that way against Army. Yeah, there's been times you feel that way, sure.
Yeah, but the issue is sometimes it'll be 10-point, 17-point quarter, 0-point quarter. And sometimes where it's not even close, which is frustrating, right? I mean, that Louisville game, you rattle off 21 points in the first quarter, and you had a combined total yards of offense from the second and third quarter of 60 yards. Right. And so you can't keep living in that feast or famine mentality, right? Like put drives together, extend drives, because on the opposite side of the ball, Al Golden and Marcus Freeman are going to be asking a lot of their defense to stop Jeremiah Smith and Egbuka and Tate and Judkins and Henderson. They're going to have a full plate similar to the offense, but both sides of the football are going to have to do what they need to in this one. It can't be hey, defense, we know you just got 2 straight 3-and-outs. We need you for a third because we're still waiting for the offense to get its wheels turning. And we know there's only 4 minutes left in the second quarter, but they'll get there eventually. It has to be a full effort. It has to be from start to finish, come out hot. Don't play and call things offensively to what the game is dictating. Go out and set the pace. And that has to be Notre Dame's mantra on offense. And if they're able to do that, I feel really confident about their ability to, one, put points on the board, and two, win this football game, right? So that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with Notre Dame's offense as a whole.
We'll be able to dive into those type of specifics even more when we get to our keys to victory later this week, Trev, and even a little bit later in this show when we talk about some of the matchups and things like that and the stacking up. But yeah, it's gonna be a fun battle, man. It's gonna be a fun battle. We're gonna get into part 2, and we're gonna break down Ohio State's defense and really dive into the weeds here. And a lot of film, watched a lot of film. Very interesting takes. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this too, Trev. But before we do that, folks, hit that like button. See that little thumbs up right below us? Go and hit that for us. We'd greatly appreciate it. If you have not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And if you are someone who likes listening to a podcast platform, if maybe you're watching the show live right now or you're watching it on replay and you would like it to be cut up into little smaller segments, we do upload the videos. We do cut them up, and a day or two later we'll upload them. But we always, the next morning after a show, we'll cut up each segment into individual pieces. So like today's show will be broken into 4 parts, and we will put those up. So if you are subscribed to our podcast platform, you'll be able to get these shows in a different format. And if you like listening to us more than you like looking at us, which I can completely understand, you can also sign up for our podcast platforms there as well. So reminder, no mailbag today. So if there are some questions you'd like for us to address, go and throw in the super chat. Or if you're a message board member, go and throw that question on the board, and we'll go address it on the board. So you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
All right, Brian. So now we're going to get into Ohio State's defense, and we're going to start to break down what makes this defense so dangerous, what makes them so effective. Because we said it yesterday, this has been the side of the football for the Buckeyes that has been the most constant. Similar to Notre Dame's offense, Ohio State's offense has been a little bit up and down, right? And there's many key factors for that. We covered a lot of that in the show yesterday. But Ohio State's defense has been the one, outside of one performance on October 12th against Oregon, has been their one constant and something that they can always rely on. So what makes this defensive unit so good, right? I mean, there's a lot of factors. Jim Knowles is into his 3rd year, similar to Al Golden being in his 3rd year. They're very experienced. They have experience at every level, and at most positions on defense, they have an abundance of it, right? But this defense has been really, really, really good this season, Brian.
I just love the consistency we've seen from this defense. Like you mentioned, I mean, you had the one bad game. Like Notre Dame had one bad game. I'd say Notre Dame had defensively had one bad game and one bad half. I'd say against Penn State. They weren't good in the first half. It still held them to 10 points, which is pretty good, but you had one bad half of football. That's to me what led me to say that this Notre Dame team and this Ohio State team are the 2 best teams in college football, is because there is a level of consistency. Like even when Ohio State's offense went through some tough stretches, they were still a team capable of winning games because of their defense. Their defense just kind of showed up week after week. And and part of the issue in the Oregon game was I just don't think they played well. Like just like I don't think Oregon played very well. I mean, Ohio State was the better team. I picked Ohio State to win. I'm not shocked that they won. But Oregon played poorly on top of Ohio State playing well. And it wasn't always Ohio State forcing them to play well. Sometimes they were just not playing well. That's going to happen sometimes. And guess what Ohio State did? They took full advantage of it and whooped them pretty good. But, Trev, when I look at it, that's the thing I love about this team is when I break down the film is just that level of consistency from the defense. It really is impressive because, as you mentioned, I mean, Notre Dame's had their moments where their offense has struggled, and Ohio State certainly had theirs. They both played 15 games. Notre Dame has scored in the 20s, less than 30, I should say, 6 times this year, 3 times in the playoff, and Ohio State has scored less than 30 points 4 times this year, including a season low of 10 against Michigan. And, scored 21 against Nebraska, 20 against Penn State, 28 against Texas. But they could do that and still win because this defense is just every week just plays big-time football.
Yeah, I mean, their defense has held every single opponent outside of one across 2 games under 21 points.
Right.
That's impressive no matter what way you spin it. And let me preface this by saying Ohio State did play good competition in the playoffs. They did play good competition in the regular season. But even if they didn't, holding basically 13 of your opponents, because 2 games were to Oregon, all under 20 points scored, is crazy. I mean, that is a heck of a defensive stat. And Brian, that speaks to the consistency level that you're talking about. And for Notre Dame, it's similar boat on defense, right? Where does consistency come from? Experience, great scheme, great coaching, players being bought in to what they're running on defense. They have belief in it. They have clarity in it. They're able to execute it at the highest level because they're not thinking too much.
Yeah.
And that's Ohio State's defense, man. They have clarity in what they're doing. They have so many guys on that defense that are now in their 3rd year of that system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Cody Simon, all of these guys are in. I think Lathan Ransom.
Even Sonny Styles. Lathan Ransom's a senior. Yeah.
Yes.
Denzel Burke's a senior.
Yes.
Davison Igbignosin is a junior, but he's been in the system. He was a transfer, but he's been in the system now 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's funny that, they talk about transfers for Ohio State, the big impact they've had. We've had 1 transfer make a big impact. 1 this year transfer make a big impact, and it was Caleb Downs. Everybody else was a returner, as far as the starting lineup. And this is you talk about experience. This Ohio State defense reminds me a lot of last year's Notre Dame defense. Not in results or style. I'm just saying, like, last year's Notre Dame defense was so experienced. I mean, you had 5th and 6th years across the board. Notre Dame is actually a very weird defense this year, in that there's a couple 5th and, like, some RJ Opens a 6th year, Mills is a 5th year, Cross is a 6th year, and then Kaiser's a 6th year, and then Xavier Watts is a 5th year, and then it's a bunch of freshmen and sophomores.
I know.
You know what I mean?
And it's a bunch of guys at 1st year starting.
Right. And it's kind of funny that way, but Ohio State's a very veteran group, and to your point, they don't beat themselves. And that's been a big reason for their success this year is that right there, Trev, they've been an elite unit from the beginning of the year to now. And it's another reason why I've said these are the 2 best teams in college football, because they're the 2 best defenses. And I say defense will get you to the show, but offense is going to have to win it, right? And that's what this matchup is about for Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's defense is going to be able to play well to some degree against Ohio State, but you're going to need your offense to step up and help you out. There's going to be a stretch in the game where Ohio State's offense is going to be feeling it, and they're going to get some points. You got to answer, let's be honest too. If it wasn't for the Notre Dame defense stepping up big last year in multiple red zone situations, that game might not have been close.
No.
I mean, they stopped them at the 1 yard line. They had another red zone stop in the first half. The defense had to make some big plays to keep it from really getting out of hand until the offense finally figured it out in the 3rd quarter. And they figured it out for 2 drives. And that's the big thing is you can't do that again in this game, Trevor. You can't. You can't wait till the 3rd quarter to get going in this game. And because this team is just too good defensively. They'll choke you out. And man, it is good. And look, they're built somewhat structurally as we kind of dive into what the scheme for Ohio State is. They're built somewhat structurally similar to Notre Dame. Yeah. They're a 4-2-5 team that will a lot of times line up in 4-3 personnel. I've seen games. I think it was the Michigan State game I was watching where they had Sonny Styles playing his normal position. They actually had it looked like they had Arvell restarting at Mike, and then it was Shane Simon was at the will, is what it looked like to me. So they had all 3 of their linebackers in the starting lineup. And because why? Because Michigan State's a 12 personnel run the football team. And we've seen them be able to get into that, but they'll still move Styles all around and, kind of got him back into his rover days. They don't call it the rover, but that's what it's Notre Dame's rover. And then there's games where they'll line up in 4-2-5 with 5 DBs in the game the whole time, depending on what the opponent does. So, they're very physical up front. They're very gap sound, a lot like Notre Dame. They will – a couple differences schematically, Trevor, with this team. Number one, they don't blitz their linebackers quite as much as Notre Dame if they don't have to. Like Notre Dame blitzes their linebackers all the time because they want to, not because they have to. Ohio State will blitz their linebackers at times. I'm talking base downs, first and second down. They won't always. There's been games where I don't see their linebackers blitz at all. And when they do, they're like at the snap, run stunts and things like that. They'll heat people up on third down for sure. But on first and second down, they don't do as much of that. And that's one structural thing. And then number two is they play a lot more zone than Notre Dame does, who's primarily a man defense.
I mean, the thing that I really like about their personnel groupings, when you talk schematically, the thing that makes their scheme work really well is they have a lot of length on defense, right? You go through and you look at their defensive line unit, right? Like going level to level. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, both 6'5" guys, right? I mean, Tyleik Williams, he's a little bit shorter than them. Like, I think he's 6'3".
He's shorter, but he seems to have pretty good length because he gets into people, man.
Yeah. No, he's shorter at 6'3", but he's shorter in comparison to the 6'5" JT and Jack Sawyer, but he has really good length, still good size. He's a 300-plus pounder. Same thing with Ty Hamilton is another 6'3" guy.
He's had a really good year.
Yes,
like
he has.
A really good year for them.
Yeah. Yeah, Ty Hamilton has stepped up. Like he's been a really good player for them. And then you get into like the second level of the defense, right? Cody Simon's a 6'2" guy. Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese are both 6'4". Those are very long linebackers. Sonny Styles
is long.
Yeah, man. Yes.
He is really long.
He is. And their length, when you go through and you break down their stats, like there's a reason why their defensive line has so many batted down passes, right? I mean, Jack Sawyer has 6, like in just the raw stats, 6 passes defended. JT has 3. Tyleik Williams has 1. Kenyatta Jackson Jr. has 1. Caden McDonald has 1. And then you get to the second level where you start talking about they have 2 6'4" linebackers. Their smaller linebacker is 6'2", and then you get into their secondary. They have longer corners. Davis Henigbenosin is 6'2". Denzel Burke is 6'1". Their safeties are like safety size. Like Lathan Ransom, he's a 6'1" kid. Caleb Downs is 6 foot. Jordan Hancock's a decent-sized nickel at 6'1". So they have good size in length throughout their defense, man. I mean, that's one thing that on top of a really good scheme and their experience, they're very long. They can eat up a lot of space, man.
We've talked a lot about how disruptive the Notre Dame defense is from a secondary standpoint. And Notre Dame this season ranks 7th in college football in pass breakups. They have 61. Ohio State's one spot ahead of them with 63. Now, Notre Dame has more passes defended because Notre Dame has 9 more interceptions than Ohio State. But Ohio State has 63 pass breakups. And when you start talking about how they got more than 10 of them from the D-line, that kind of plays. But it's also they play smart football. They know, like, hey, I'm not winning on this rush. It also speaks to they're not as aggressive as Notre Dame. They're willing to say, hey, we're going to keep things in front of us. They'll play more off coverage. Now, I'm very curious if they're going to play as much off coverage against Notre Dame as we've seen them play in other games. I would think that you'd maybe want to kind of come up and press Notre Dame a little bit more, not let Notre Dame get its quick game going. We've seen some teams do that. Penn State did a little bit more of that against Notre Dame than they have. And I think Notre Dame, that's why Notre Dame was able to make some big plays because Penn State went away from what they normally do. So maybe then I shouldn't see that. But I could see them being more aggressive with their corners, especially into the boundary, Trev, in this game. But so they're built differently from a schematic structural standpoint, and Notre Dame likes to attack. But Ohio State attacks a little differently. They're more willing to keep things in front of them, rally to the ball, be sound tacklers. They're more willing to let their 4-man rush get after the quarterback. And that's a big reason why Ohio State doesn't blitz as much, because they have a defensive line that can get to the quarterback, that can shut down the run by itself. And then that allows their linebackers to roam free and run to the ball. And they've got athletic linebackers. Cody Simon's turned out to be a heck of a football player. He really has turned out to be a heck of a football player. Arvell Reese is going to be a future Big Ten star. I mean, he's a really good linebacker. Sonny Styles is really athletic. We'll talk more about some things you can do to take advantage of him later, but he's still really athletic, and that allows him to make a lot of plays. So I'm curious how they treat Notre Dame's pass game. Do they kind of still do what they've done? Which, if they do, I think there's some things there for Notre Dame to take advantage of that some other teams couldn't. But I think Notre Dame also needs to be prepared for them to come up and be more aggressive and play more man. and we'll see if Notre Dame's able to win in that regard. But that's kind of where they're at schematically. I mean, they slant a lot. They don't do a ton of twists, but they do some. I think you fully expect them to do more of that in this game because of how much Notre Dame has struggled with it.
Yeah.
But they're a really aggressive slant team. They line up with their their defensive ends on one side. You know who Jack Sawyer's going against, and you know who JT's going against. I mean, they don't flip their ends a whole lot. So, I mean, you kind of know who's going to be where with their defense, more so than you do Notre Dame. But that's fine because they know how to play. They've got their refined technique. I only have to play right-handed. I only have to play left-handed. And it works for them. And then they have talented players. That's the other thing too, right? It's Jim Knowles isn't doing anything different here than he did at Oklahoma State or at Duke. Really, I mean, it's still similar philosophy. Difference is now he's got some dudes. He's got a bunch of NFL players on his defense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you want any more of a testament to Jim Knowles, I mean, his last year at Oklahoma State, I mean, he had like the number 5 rush defense, the number 4 total defense. I mean, he was top 5 in several different categories. I have an article coming out about it later today, just kind of rattling off some of his stats when he was in his final year at Oklahoma State. But you're right. I mean, but that bump up in talent, right, has taken them from like 4th best, 5th best to now in some categories, they are the best defense in college football, right? And we've been saying it all week. Notre Dame and Ohio State, to me, interchangeable. When you start talking about the best defense in college football, there's a reason why they're 1-2 or 2-1 in different categories. And so it's a testament to what Jim Knowles has been able to do with this group. But you're right. I mean, it's in the games where Ohio State, I can't even say in the games, in the moments where their defense has struggled, it's their 4-man rush hasn't been able to generate pressure. That was a big issue against Oregon in October, is Dylan Gabriel was sacked 0 times.
Not pressured a lot.
Nope.
Yeah.
And then you go through like early on, and when I mean early on, I mean like the first 2 offensive possessions that Indiana had, their 4-man pressure wasn't able to get home.
Same with Michigan State. I mean, Michigan State was running on Ohio State early. They were pushing them off the line, and they were giving their quarterback time to throw the football, Child's time to throw the football. And they were moving the ball on Ohio State early. They turned it over on downs. They had an interception or had a fumble deep in Ohio. I mean, I think Child's fumble in the first half was at like the 10.
Yeah, it was inside the red zone for sure.
And it's because you're controlling the line of scrimmage. Doesn't happen often, but when you do have success against them, that's where it starts. You're 100% correct. That's where it starts.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Jim Knowles switched up a few things and started bringing significantly more linebacker pressure in the IU game. We talk about how much Curtis Rourke was under pressure in that game. Cody Simon had 2.5 sacks in that game because their 4-man front wasn't able to get home. And then that's kind of when the difference in athleticism started to take over for Ohio State, is once they were starting to get pressure, their receivers just weren't able to win one-on-one against Denzel Burke, against Davison Igbenogany, against Jordan Hancock in the slot. I mean, you go through and you break down this defense. They have playmakers at every level. I've been saying this for weeks. Caleb Downs is probably the best open field tackler in any secondary in college football. So I know we'll talk about it more, but I've been tooting the horn of Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love all year, that especially when healthy, I don't know if there's anybody that can bring them down in the open field. I do think Caleb Downs could be, not from a speed perspective, not that he's slow. It's just Jeremiah Love has top level speed when healthy. But if there is somebody that I don't like, it's going to be a battle to see, that I think that will trade blows. Caleb Downs is the guy that can bring people down very well in the open field, which will be fun to talk about when we get there, man. But yeah, I mean,
Lathan Ransom's turned out to be a pretty good tackler. He's become a much better tackler this year as well, as he's gotten more experience and more time in their system as well. And like, there's a couple plays I'm watching him against Iowa and I'm watching against Michigan State last night, Trev, and I'm like, okay, this play right here, that's going to be the difference in this game. Where it's like it's blocked up and the running back has a cutback and it's him and Caleb Downs in the hole. And if you make him miss, strike up the band. If he tackles you, it's a 1-yard gain. And this season, Notre Dame's been able to make those plays. Can they make those against Ohio State? You don't got to make them every time. You just got to make 2 or 3 of them. And it's a difference in the ball game. But so far this year, I mean, part of the reason Jim Knowles does what he does is because he has Caleb Downs to do it. And that's not somehow kind of diminishing what Jim Knowles does. That's what every coordinator does. I mean, Al Golden would not be able to successfully run the defense he wants to run if it wasn't for having the corners that he has. I mean, that's coaching, right? And so, but that allows him to do some of the things he does where they don't have to blitz. But like you said, they had to blitz more against Indiana, and it worked against Indiana. I don't know that they necessarily are going to want to have to do that against Notre Dame, because if they're struggling to stop Notre Dame early, then that's not a great sign. And Riley Leonard's a little bit more effective kind of getting out of that stuff. And if you hit him, you bring him down, great. But if you miss on him, as Penn State found out, that could result in some big plays. And so that's going to be one of those chess matches in this game. In this regard is, you're going to be bringing pressure at times, but can you pick it up? But they're going to try to dominate the game with their front four. That's who they are. And if they can, then Notre Dame's going to have a long day. Like if the front four dominates, it's going to be a long day. And what happened last year in the second half when Notre Dame started winning that game, and why we were so frustrated with some of the play calling on that final drive, is you were starting to lean on Ohio State and really move them off the ball, and then you stop doing it. Now, here's the difference. You don't have Joe Alt and Blake Fisher on this team. But that doesn't mean you still can't do it. And that's going to be a big key in this game, is can you do that in this game? Or is the defensive line going to dominate this game? That's good. I mean, we'll talk more about it in the matchups part, but that's the thing that makes this defense really good is they don't have to bring pressure. They don't have to, their safeties can play a lot of cleanup ball, which is why their safeties make a lot of tackles. I mean, they're safety. It used to be, Trev, where you didn't want your safeties making a ton of plays. You didn't. Well, Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom are third and fourth on their defense and tackles at 77 and 73. They've got 88 combined solo tackles this year. 10 years ago, that's probably a bad sign. That means that they're but what it means for them is, if you look at like Notre Dame and how good their safeties are, Xavier Watts has 74 and Don Schuler has 55. Now, Rod Hurd has 36, and they don't have a third safety that plays as much as those two, right? I mean, so a little bit of context there. But the point is they ask a lot of their safeties, but it's not as stressful as it can be for other teams who are blitzing a lot, because then it's like the safeties are now playing cleanup, or they're fitting off of, you force a bounce and their safeties are there to clean it up. You force a cutback and you're forcing it back into the safeties. And so but you can do that because you do have safeties that can play so well in space. And Notre Dame's going to have to make them pay for that a little bit. Can they do that? I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll find out.
And we'll
talk a little bit more about that when we get into the Keys to Victory show this week as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just one of the laundry list of questions that we're going to find out. You know what I mean? When we do finally get to watch this game on January 20th. Brian, you were bringing up a couple things about, making Caleb Downs or Lathan Ransom miss in the hole, and some of the things that they're going to have to do on offense in order to move the ball, in order to put points up on the board. And, I kind of wanted to start talking about, like the areas that Notre Dame does match up well against Ohio State. And one of the first things that we have down here is the run game, So, I mean, Ohio State does have a really, really stout rush defense. Mm-hmm. They're third in the country.
Behind Indiana and Ole Miss.
Okay. Yeah, two very good rush defenses, right? But in the games, in the moments that Ohio State has struggled, they have struggled to stop the run. Now, Tennessee couldn't generate anything through the air. They had trouble with a semi-mobile quarterback in Nico. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, but
I have the same problem. It's all good.
Yeah. So, but Nico at Tennessee had 2 rushing touchdowns against him, and I believe sacks included. He had 47 rushing yards against Ohio State's defense right now.
And that's what allowed them to kind of somewhat get back in that game, where if they could have made one stop to start the third quarter, they could have made that a 1-possession game.
Yeah. Yep. But then you go through and you look at what they did to Oregon and what they did to Texas. They held Texas to 58 rushing yards. Oregon ended the day with -23. Now, Dylan Gabriel was sacked quite a bit, but, I mean, there was a good amount of run stuffs around the -2, -1 to +1 to +2 on the offensive line. I think Jordan James going out. I mean, Whittington's a good running back for Oregon, but Jordan James leaving that game with an injury too did not help. but not trying to take anything away from Ohio State's defense. There's a heavy emphasis to stop the run because their first matchup, they struggled a little bit. That was 155-yard performance, 2 rushing touchdowns, which, 155 rushing yards on the ground is not it's not anything somebody's going to write home about. But when you compound it with a really good dynamic passing offense that Oregon has, makes it really hard to stop. It's the same thing with Ohio State's offense. When they're at their best, they're around that 150 to 175 mark on the ground, but they're at 270 through the air, right? And so that's what makes that offense so dangerous, is when they're balanced. So you have down that Notre Dame matches up well in the run game.
Yeah, when they're playing their game. I mean, that's the thing, is it's not that they match up well in the run game. It's about they have the ability to hurt Ohio State in the run game. And what has happened a lot this year, Trevor, is we have seen teams have some success early running the football in Ohio State, and then they have to completely abandon it because they fall behind. And Notre Dame is a team that can have some of that success. I mean, I talked a little bit about the Michigan State game. I mean, Michigan State was hanging with Ohio State early. In first play of the game, they rip off a nice cutback run for a big play. They were getting some juice. Childs was, who's a pretty athletic kid. I wouldn't call him a mobile quarterback yet, but he will be. But he's athletic. He hasn't quite, his pocket presence needs a lot of work because I think spent most of the year at 18 years old. But you saw it in that game a little bit as well. You saw it a little bit against Iowa, where they were able early in the game to run the ball. I mean, Caleb Johnson, ran for 86 yards on 15 carries, and Brendan Sullivan, another back, had a 30-yard gain in that game. And the overall numbers weren't good because they couldn't run it a lot, but early in the game, they were able to have a little bit of success running football. We saw what Michigan was able to do to them this year as well. And so we've seen teams have some early success on them running the football. You mentioned what Jordan James was able to do against them early in that game. And he ran for over 100 yards that game. They ran for over $150 in that game. Dylan Gabriel scrambled for 30 yards. So we've seen them have some of those moments where they can be vulnerable against the run. Not when I mean vulnerable, I mean like, okay, they might give up $150 to $170. I'm not talking about you're going to go run for 3 bills on them. I'm not saying that. But like the Georgia game, I said against Georgia, you get the 150 against Georgia, you're going to win that football game. Now, this game might be a little bit different because this offense is better than Georgia's offense. But Indiana was a similar way. If you can establish the ground game early, which Notre Dame did against Indiana, who's got a very good run defense, and did a very good job of shutting Ohio State down until the final drive of the game. And so you look at it and say, I mean, Ohio State against Indiana rushed for 115 yards. I think like 39 of that came on the final drive of the game when Travion Henderson broke one when they were trying to, basically blitz and stop, get a stop. But Notre Dame was able to kind of get their ground game going early against Indiana. People say, well, if you take away the 90 and okay, that was great, but that play happened and they can do that against Ohio State. They have the backs, but look at the next drive. This is the one that everybody seems to forget. The 9-minute drive where they went 16 plays, and a lot of that was running the football. And it was 4 yards here, 6 yards there. You finally get a bounce, and Jadarian breaks one. And those drives are important, Trevor, because with this backfield, the more you can hang on to the ball, the more you can move the chains. And we'll talk about this on our Keys to Victory. The more opportunities that they will bust one. That's the big thing. Is like when you don't have the ball a whole lot, like they didn't in the first half against Penn State, the odds of your running backs breaking one are reduced because of opportunity. It's mathematics. And if you have a 15% chance of breaking a 60-yard run, well, guess what? If you have 70 plays compared to 50 plays, there's more opportunities at that rate to break one. And so that's kind of where I think it right there is, can Notre Dame, am I guaranteeing Notre Dame's going to run the ball on Ohio State? No, I'm not. Is it going to be easy to run the ball on against Ohio State? No, it won't. Will it be a 25, like Army, 29 carries for like 270 yards? No, it won't be like that. I don't think it'll be like that. If it does, we're going to have a fun post-game show, that's for sure. But it's more so you get to your 180 on 40 carries because you're grinding it out. You're getting that 6, you're getting that 4, and then occasionally you pop one for 20. And that's kind of what the goal is. Now, if you can bust one for 60 like you did against A&M, that's great. But I'm saying I don't think you need to rely on going for 60 against this defense. If you can, that's huge. But even the grinded out drives like they had against Indiana on drive 2 to jump to a 14-0 lead, you need to have some of those. And those are all things that factor into it, Trevor. So when you talk about how Notre Dame matches up, I think that's an area where I think they can handle themselves against Ohio State. And when you're going to win a game like this, you've got there's got to be some areas. And then part of that too is, you mentioned it earlier, Trev, the mobile quarterback piece.
For Notre Dame overall run game, man, it's in games like this, you have to do what got you here. And Brian, that's something that you've said this entire playoffs. Do what you did to get you to this moment. Notre Dame isn't an offense that's just going to come out, drop back, and fire off 10 straight passes in a game before running the football. That's just not them. I don't know if that will ever be them. And I don't even think that's dictated by who's under center. I really don't. It's just their identity is establishing the ground game. Now, I do believe that the passing game could look a little different depending on who is under center, what they're able to do, push the ball down the field more vertically.
This offense would, in that regard, would look a lot different if they had Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr in there.
Right.
But that's not who they are.
Right. But establishing the ground game, and I've said it all postseason long. I've been saying it since the conference championship games. The teams that have been able to run the football gives themselves the best opportunity to win. And I don't really think that that's a secret recipe for success. But for Notre Dame, it's even more true, right? You go through and look at the second half of the Penn State game. They They matched what they rushed for in the entire first half in their first 2 carries of the game.
Yeah.
You're down by a score. It's 10-3. It's a touchdown game. You come out and you immediately start running the football, and it's effective, right? Jeremiah Love goes for 6, and then he goes from back-to-back rushes of over 9 yards. And so within 3 carries, you already bested what you did in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this one that we're about to talk about here, being a mobile quarterback, that was my number one. Like, that is I think Riley Leonard is the catalyst in this game that Ohio State just hasn't had a whole lot of experience with. I'm not saying that every single game for, 14 games, 15 games, they've just played a bunch of stiffs, right? Like, they didn't face 15 Jack Cones, it's not that at all. However,
don't you speak negatively about my dude, Jack Cone.
I love Jack Cone. He's not
I
mobile.
know he was a complete stiff in the pocket, but hey, listen, go ask USC, right, about his ability to tuck one and run. Oh, I'm totally kidding. I love Jack Cone, but your point is valid. Jack Cone is not a guy that you're like, I don't know if Jack's going to beat us with his legs today. That was never a concern.
No, but they have not faced a mobile quarterback like Riley Leonard, a runner like Riley Leonard. Dylan Gabriel has skill. Dylan Gabriel is also 5'11". He's Dylan. He's a
Gabriel, move the chains runner. That's what he is.
Yeah, absolutely. You could make the argument that from a size and athleticism standpoint, and I don't think the athleticism is all that close. The closest comp that they had to Riley Leonard was Drew Aller when they played him against Penn State. You know what I mean? And Drew Aller was their second leading rusher that game behind Tyler Warren, which is actually pretty crazy. But Ohio State's defense hasn't faced a mobile quarterback like Riley Leonard. And Riley Leonard isn't a type of kid that he can just move the chains. He can bust one too, right? Once he gets into the open field, he has that ability. So to me, Riley Leonard's the catalyst in this game. And not because I think that this is going to be the game that he goes out and he throws for 285 yards and 3 touchdowns. If he does, great. And if that happens, one of 2 things. Either this game is not close or Notre Dame was behind early.
This game is not close is the answer. I just don't know which direction it's not close.
True.
That's the statement. If he throws for 285, it's because Notre Dame just killed Ohio State. Or they're getting killed by Ohio State, and he's getting a lot of second half garbage yards in an attempt to try to come back from a 21-point halftime deficit.
Yep.
To your point. But the only thing I'd put, I think Nico's more mobile, more of a runner like Riley than is Drew Aller. And Dylan Raiola is another guy that had some success running the ball against them. He had a 38-yard run. He ended up rushing for 31 yards because he had some sacks taken away. But to your point, he'll scramble. Nico will scramble. They're not the designed runners that Riley Leonard is. But I actually think it's the scrambling that's going to be the biggest impact in this game. in my opinion, Trevor, of why I think Notre Dame has a chance to win. Because what is not discussed enough when you talk about Riley Leonard and his impact in the pass game is too many people just look at his impact in the pass game as passing attempts, passing yards, passing touchdowns, completion percentage.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of times this year where, it's a 3rd and 9 and Riley drops back and it's not there and he takes off running and moves the chains. I mean, he had 80 yards against Georgia. He had the 132-yard run. I think half of his yards were scrambles in that game. That's where Riley can have a big impact, and that's what makes him so much different is he can do that, which a couple other quarterbacks, Nico can do that. Drew Aller, a lot of his runs were on scrambles where you lose contain. And then, of course, Raiola, similar deal. Riley has that, but he's better at it than any of the other quarterbacks. But he also brings that running element to the table of the designed runs. And that's something that I think is true for anybody.
His improvisation, too, against Penn State was also fantastic. Moved the chains twice, both to Jaden Greathouse on broken scramble plays. I mean, he had that fantastic one on I think it was the game-winning field goal drive, where it was 3rd down. They meant to run out the clock. Everybody expected them to just run the football and bleed more time off the clock. And they called a sprint out left, and he found Jaden Greathouse rolling off of his left side. And so I think that's some of the improvisation from Riley Leonard that is also something that needs to be taken into account for. It's those moments, right? I'm not saying that he's going to dance around in the pocket like Joe Burrow did in 2019 in the SEC championship game when he made Jalen Carter miss and threw it downfield to Justin Jefferson. Like, it's nothing like that, but it's the moments. Those are the chain movers that they haven't had at the quarterback position in these games before in the past, right? So for me, that's going to be a huge, huge proponent one, Brian. The third one that you had was Notre Dame's tight ends and their slot receivers.
I like how you put this all on me. So if it's a bad take, you're like, this is the third one that Brian had. In case it turns out not to be accurate, it's totally his fault. Tight ends and slots. I mean, look at last year's game. I mean, we're going to talk about when we get into matchups, part 4 of our show. We're going to talk about the outside receivers, and you have to make some plays outside. You have to.
Yep.
But you have to also be willing to attack them over the middle like they did last year. You got Mitchell Evans doing what he did. He had a great game last year. I don't know. I think Mitchell Evans, if he plays like he did against Penn State, that's a weapon. But there's matchups there that I like. If you look at, Jaden Greathouse had 2 catches for 40 yards last year. He had that one crossing route. Chris Tyree had a 25-yard gain last year. There are things you can do over the middle of the field if you're smart about it that can give them some problems if you have playmakers there. And as Notre Dame showed against Penn State, they have some playmakers in the slot. And we didn't even see really any of Jaden Harrison. Although if you give Riley more time on that first drive, as I've said and I pointed out, you've got Jaden Harrison wide open over the middle of the field for a big play. It was the second drive. Excuse me. The second drive. It was the drive of the interception. It was 2 plays before the interception on drive 2. You got him wide open over the middle of the field. You got to be smart about how you get to it. There's ways you can manipulate the Ohio State secondary to get some of those type of looks. Yeah. But that's an area where to attack this defense, you have to be willing to Marcus Freeman talks about, you got to be willing to attack 52 and a third. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to, and then vertically. You can't just say, well, they got Caleb Downs and they've got this, and so we're just going to throw outside all day. If that's going to be the case, you're going to have a long freaking day. You've got to be willing to find the right ways to attack over the middle of the field like they did last year. Now, some of it was a one-on-one, throw it up and let Mitchell Evans make a great catch. You can't assume you're going to replicate that.
Right.
But there were other opportunities. I mean, I pointed out on film after the game, Trevor, there was 2 or 3 times where Chris Tyree was just gone on a seam route, and Sam Hartman just didn't see him or didn't have time to see him. So you got to be willing to take – now, they didn't have Caleb Downs last year at safety, but their safeties weren't slouches last year, and one of them is still on the starting lineup. But you just got to be willing to not be afraid. Like, this is the big thing. You get on the stage, you can't coach scared. You can't be like, well, we're going to avoid that guy, because they're really good. Well, just why don't you hand them the trophy and not put your players at risk of injury? You know what I mean? Like, you got to be willing to go at them. You got to be smart about it, when to do it, how to do it. but you also have to have playmakers there. And I do think Notre Dame has playmakers there with obviously Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan. Also with, your running backs, which I'll get to a little bit later. Actually, I'll get to a little bit later. But like, look what Texas did with their tight ends and running backs against Sonny Styles, who has allowed more catches than anyone on their defense this year. He's been a liability. I watched it against Michigan State. They went at him in the pass game. But like, there was a play Michigan State did where they had their tight end in kind of a reduced look, and they ran their like kind of like a slot fade-ish type of thing, and then they ran their tight end on like a little move to beat Sonny Styles. There's another play where they went right at Caleb Downs, but they ran a levels like a seam route behind him, and they hit a seam route over the middle because they did something to occupy his eyes where he had to kind of be in between, the high-low thing. You got to do things like that. If you're just running nothing but horizontal stretches where it's like you got to win a bunch of one-on-ones, that's not going to be a recipe for success against Ohio State. But if you can do some things with some levels, some high-low, some overs, some take them out and then bring somebody behind, those type of things are where they had some success last year. And if you can get back to that, then I think you can have success this year because you do have playmakers in that position. And Jaden Harrison's another example of a guy that can do that. They'll do some things with Jordan Faison where they bring him in motion and stack him, and he's the guy working over the middle of the field. So you have weapons there, Trev, and you have some matchups there that you can take advantage of if you're willing to be creative and find ways to do it. We just got to find out if they're willing to be creative and find ways to do it. That's going to be the big thing. But teams that have done that have had success. When Texas is rolling, that's kind of where they went. When Michigan State had some big plays early in the pass game, that's where they went. Now, can you do it for 4 quarters? That's a much different question. And the answer is no, you're not going to go rip them out. But that's how you get some of those chunk plays that are going to help you out. So you may throw for 210 and 60 of those came on 2 plays. That's what you need against this Ohio State team because you're just not going to 10-yard drive them 5 times. You're not going to go on 5 10-yard or 10 play, 70-yard touchdown drives in Ohio State and score 35. You're just not going to do it. You need to be able to generate some chunk plays. And despite the criticism this offense gets, they are a big play offense in the run game. And then we've seen more of it in the pass game at times this offseason as well. We saw the post route to Jordan Faison. They were very aggressive throwing the ball down the field against Penn State. You're going to need more of that against Ohio State. This isn't going to be a ground and pound game. You're going to need to be able to make some plays. And you've got the tight ends and slots and backs to do that against them. And that's another reason that I do feel like Notre Dame has some opportunities to have some success in this game. But then there's also areas, Trevor, that are concerns that Notre Dame is going to have to perform on. It's the O-line, D-line. How's that going to do? We talked a lot about that, or talk a little bit about more of that in the matchup section. But like that's a concern. Notre Dame's yet again dealing with injuries on the offensive line against a really good defense. It's just are, And then can they make plays in the pass game? Those are my 2 big concerns. Like, can the Notre Dame offense? It's funny because like my number one thing in both areas is related to the offensive line. The offensive line can move the ball on Ohio State, but they could also get whooped. We don't know what we're going to get from that unit. First of all, we don't know who's going to start.
I was just about to say, we don't even know what the unit's going to be, and I think that's what gives me the most pause. Yeah. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, you're good, man. But that's a big question mark. It's the same thing against Penn State. I said, look, somebody asked me, I think I might say on the show, I was asked on other shows last week, friends of mine, he's like, what is your big concern? And the concern was that they just get beat up front. That was the big concern. And for the first half, they did. And that's why they trailed 10-3. In the second half, they didn't, which is why they won the game. You don't want to wait till the third quarter to figure it out against Ohio State, because this is a better offense than Penn State. And that's the big question mark and the big concern is getting beat up front. And then the other one is they have players that can make plays, but will they? That when this offense has struggled, that's been the 2 issues. Receivers don't step up and make plays, and the O-line gets whooped. And this is a defense capable of whooping them in both areas.
Yeah, the biggest concerns for me, like all tie into the downfield passing game. Like it's similar. Do you remember when Alabama was going on their run and almost every single, like their dynasty run from basically, 2009 to 2020, call it. And everybody talked about how in order to beat Alabama on offense, you have to be willing to attack their man coverage. And I know Ohio State doesn't run a lot of man, but to me, it's the same principle applies. You can't coach afraid of making a mistake, because those were the games that Alabama started beating those big name opponents 35-10 and 42-14, right? Is because it was, well, we don't want to throw it here because they have that guy, and you have to be willing to attack them downfield. Denzel Burke, great corner. He had one bad week against Oregon, and that is, then everybody started riding home against, Then he started having, everybody's like, you know what? Maybe he's just not that good because of a very small sample size. If you're going to attack anybody downfield, it's Mr. Hold, Davis Enigmanosin. Like, I mean, like literally, if there's a person that you go after, but
Mr. Hold, that's really funny.
Thank you. But, you can't be afraid of, well, Caleb Downs is over the middle, so we're just going to stay away from the middle of the field. And it's like, so you're just going to run screens all night? Let him sit down on it. Let him go fill in the alley.
I'll be honest, though. I don't think Denzel Burke's been as good this year as he was last year.
Oh, I don't think so either.
He hasn't been. He's still good, though, right? Like, this is the thing. Not as good Denzel Burke is still better than a lot of corners.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like Benjamin Morrison. People, Benjamin wasn't playing his best football early in the year, and then some people took that to, like, let's bash Benjamin Morrison and talk about he's not playing as well as he does when he's on his game, but he's still really good.
Yeah.
And the numbers back that up. He was on pace to allow fewer catches, a lower completion percentage, and fewer yards this year than he did last year, even though he wasn't as dominant as we hoped he would be. This is different because he's giving up more plays, more yards per catch, more big plays. And it wasn't just the Oregon game that he's had some moments, but that was the game where he really struggled. Like, that was the game where he really got whooped pretty good. But, he gave up a big play last week. But, but the point is the Oregon game, to your point, Trev, is the anomaly. I mean, he didn't allow a single catch the first two rounds. And but the thing is, you don't have Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, but you also can't coach afraid. So you don't go at him the same way Oregon did. You're not going to drop back and throw a bunch of bombs on him on straight go routes because you don't have those guys. But, there are things you can do depending on how they're playing. If they're playing a lot of press man, there's things you can do. I think he is vulnerable, like Christian Gray is, to a good double move off the line because he's very aggressive. If you can beat him at the line, he may get you 3 out of 4 times, but that one time you beat him, you're going to have 3 or 4 steps on him for a big play. Riley's got to hit it. If they play a lot of off coverage, there's things you can do with some out cuts and some corner routes that I've seen teams do against them. And even some teams that aren't great throwers. I mean, like I said, we saw, like I was talking about Michigan State earlier. So those are different aspects of it, Trevor. But your point is true, is you can't coach scared. You can't say, well, we're just going to, like, that hurt. To me, that hurt Penn State.
Yeah.
Because they were just like, we're not throwing at 15. I mean, we're not going to throw at 15.
No.
And that made it easier to defend them.
Yeah. I mean, the only other concern that I have for Notre Dame offensively, agree with everything that you said. The final thing that I'll add is Riley Leonard being afraid to pull the trigger on some throws. We've seen that throughout the season. And it's for the
including
fear
the postseason.
Yes. And it's been for a fear of making mistakes. Now, I hope that it's the mentality of, you know what, like if you make a mistake in the Orange Bowl or the Sugar Bowl, you kind of move yourself out of contention to go and play for a national championship. Sure. There's no what ifs after this. You know what I mean? There is no, well, if we turn it over now, then we won't advance to the next round. Like, this is it, man. And that's my fear for Riley Leonard, is he is afraid to pull the trigger on some throws because it could get intercepted by Caleb Downs, or because a Denzel Burke or Davis Enigmanosin could make a really good play on the football. The teams that have had success on Ohio State are the ones that are willing to challenge them down the field. And I'm not saying every play, right? That's not Notre Dame's offense. Riley Leonard's not going to drop back and throw the ball 42 times this game. But at certain points, you have to be willing to take those shots. When you have a matchup on Sonny Styles with a tight end or a slot receiver or a running back, take that opportunity. If there's one thing that I loved seeing from Riley Leonard in the second half of the Penn State game, was his willingness to trust his guys. Yeah. Pressured on third down, you just throw it up to Jaden Greathouse and you assume that your guy is better than the other guy. Have the trust in your playmakers, right? Because to our point, they have playmakers, right? Like it's not the Tez Johnsons. It's not the Jeremiah Smiths. It's not the Ryan Williams. but they're not a bunch of bums either.
Right.
And so for Riley Leonard, he said it before the postseason starts. He's like, I play with no regrets. I'm just letting it hang out now. It's like, okay, now it's time to really do that.
And to a degree, like something in the chat just said, I'm fine with him being afraid to pull the trigger if he doesn't throw interceptions. You cannot pull the trigger and throw a pick. Completely disagree with that comment. He was better against Penn State when he threw 2 picks than he was throwing the ball against Georgia when he threw none. Way better. Like now, listen, you clean up the interceptions, but here's the deal. What I loved about Riley's performance is, he threw the picks, but you know what he did? It didn't phase him. He kept going at Penn State. And if he had that same mindset, he doesn't throw the 3rd and 9 to Jaden Greathouse. If he's got that same mindset of, you'd be afraid to throw a pick, he doesn't throw the back shoulder to Jaden Greathouse on 3rd and 9. He doesn't throw the wheel route to Mitchell Evans, which was covered. He was covered. He had to make the perfect throw, and Mitchell Evans had to make a great catch. But that's the point you and I have talked about all year. Give your guys a chance to catch the football.
Yeah.
They can't have 3 steps on somebody all the time. Against good teams, it's a one-on-one, throw it up, let Greathouse go make a play. Give Aeneas that opportunity. And the thing that I'm hopeful is that Riley made some big-time throws after he threw both of the picks. You hope that carries. Now, you coach up the picks, and you're not acceptable because they were both mistakes. They were both read mistakes. You don't need to make that throw, but I'd rather critique that with the mindset of I need to be aggressive than when you're like by the end of the first quarter against Georgia, you're just like, he ain't feeling it. He's just not willing to throw the football. So we're going to have to do something different. Like, you got a better shot of beating Ohio State with the Riley Leonard from Penn State, even with an interception, than you do of the Riley Leonard against Georgia.
100%.
The reason why, you're not going to beat Ohio State, in my opinion, scoring essentially 6 offensive would be what they scored 9 offensive points. Because you had the one touchdown drive. The only touchdown drive you had was on a 13-yard field.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to beat Ohio State scoring 9 offensive points where you didn't have a short field.
Right. Because you can't bank on a short field.
Right.
Yeah. No,
right.
I agree.
But I'm saying I don't even know if that's going to be enough to beat Ohio State.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because, are you going to assume you're going to get that 13-yard field and you're assuming you're going to get a 98-yard touchdown? Right. So I think that too many people don't understand how playing football works. And you can't pick and choose when a quarterback, he's either aggressive or he isn't.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, you got to be aggressive, but good God, don't ever make a mistake. That's why Brian Kelly's quarterbacks failed for a decade.
That's
because we want to be aggressive, but don't ever make a mistake. And that's a problem. Like, you got to live with that a little bit. You can't win championships throwing interceptions. Deshaun Watson's on the phone. He'd like a word with you. You got to let him play. He's got to be aggressive. And you can't say, well, I want that throw, but I don't want that throw. That's part of the package.
Yeah.
Now, you don't want 2 of them, and just make better decisions in those. Be aggressive, but just go to this guy and aggressive and don't go to that guy and be aggressive. But I don't think people understand the mindset of a quarterback has to be this. And sometimes that's going to result in mistakes.
Yeah.
And you hope that they're not turnovers, but you need that mindset. You can't be like, nah, I don't want him to do that if it's going to be that. No, you can't do that. That's how you get beat. And if you're going to get beat letting it all hang out.
100%.
I took my shot. You know what I mean? Like, man, I wish I would have made that throw. I wish I would have made. No, you can't have that. Look, I took my shot and the defense made a play on it. All right, I'm going to go back. I got another drive, so I'm going to go back at it. That's football. That's football. And you can't say, well, it's not like a buffet where it's like, I want that one, I want that one, I want that one, but I don't want that one. No, this is like, dude, this is the whole package.
Yeah. And
if you want the Riley Leonard, that's the playmaker we saw against Penn State, he may throw a pick in this game. All right. You need to make sure it's not a truly a hugely costly one. And that was the thing that hurt him against Penn State. Those were costly turnovers because the second one, especially because it set up a touchdown when you had a lot of the momentum. But you got to live with that. You have to live with that. Well, and I think even now, the person in the chat, you just don't get it. I understand that. You just don't get it. You don't understand how football works. It's the mindset. And that's just who Riley Leonard is. And
Yeah,
that
man.
Riley Leonard's a whole lot better than the Georgia version of Riley Leonard.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, couple things. One, the thing that made Mitchell Evans great, talking about his contested catch in the Penn State game, when he was going on his tear in 2023, it wasn't because he had 5 steps on every single guy that he was just a route technician. I mean, the thing that made him great against Ohio State and against Duke, outside of one seam route where he was wide open, it's because he was making crazy one-handed contested catches. Like, that's why everybody loved Mitchell Evans. And I think that's what Riley is, I mean, finally starting to see in game number 15 of, hey, if I just throw it in the vicinity of 88, he has a great catch radius. But no, you brought it up perfectly, man. I mean, the Deshaun Watson thing, Dabo Swinney was asked about it heading into the postseason. They were, hey, are you going to like do anything about, Deshaun Watson turning it over this much? And Dabo was like, no, because that's who he is. Like, it's not that he's a turnover machine, but if I ask him to stop throwing interceptions, then he's going to stop making the great throws
right.
as well.
You clean up the mistakes that lead to interceptions, but you don't do it in a way where the guy just becomes less aggressive.
Right.
That's the point.
Right.
It's not saying, well, I'm okay with him throwing 17 interceptions. It's like what you have to understand is the mindset that led to that pick is the same mindset that led to the 2 huge plays that won us the football game.
Mm-hmm. Not being afraid. Right. And that's the thing that's plagued Notre Dame's quarterbacks. I mean, there's so many examples that you could go back through and look at. Like a lot of things that people talk about, like with Brett Favre, is how many interceptions he threw. He was also a gunslinger. The dude also led the league in touchdown passes for a while. Like, it's just like you have to be willing to take those sort of risks. And I'm never saying that like it's Riley taking risks is throwing into quadruple coverage, but like that's not no. But if you throw an interception because it's, one of them is a bad ball, right. The other one, a defender makes a great play on it. To me, it's like, look, it's at least you push the ball down the field, and we're having this conversation around Notre Dame and Riley Leonard and the interceptions he threw in a game that they won.
Right.
Like I would
partly
understand
because of some of the big plays he made.
Right.
Now, again, the first interception, I didn't like it. I can live with it. I didn't like it. The second one was a big mistake. We are saying you clean that stuff up. But I'd rather live with that than what we've seen in other games where he just is unwilling to pull the trigger. Because, again, it worked against Georgia. Why? Because we said going in, they're going to shut that offense down. That offense is not scoring on Notre Dame, no matter who's playing quarterback. We said that. This isn't Georgia. This is a defense that's better than Georgia's and an offense that's better than Georgia's. And so what you have to have is you don't need a repeat of the Georgia game. You don't want a repeat of the Penn State game because you don't want the 2 picks. But the mindset of the Penn State game is the one you need. It flat out is. Mm-hmm. And you can't say, well, I'm okay with that as long as it doesn't turn into interceptions, because then you're now Brian Kelly. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, I'd rather you take, the check downs and do all that than actually try to make a play because I'm so afraid of a turnover. That's the point. And that's what Riley's going to have to be in this game, is more aggressive and you can still be smart and be more aggressive. And I promise you, Mike Denbrock's not like, hey, listen, I'm cool with both those picks because you made these other plays. It's like, hey man, I love your aggressiveness, but we got to be smarter here. Yeah. And it's not so much about, you can't throw a pick there, man. You can't, no, I love the aggressiveness, but hey, listen, look at this guy, look at Mitchell Evans coming across open. Like, listen, if they're high-lowing you that much, and that linebacker's getting that much depth, guess what? He can't plant and drive on the crossing route to Mitch Evans. Mm-hmm. That's the point. You coach that up, but you don't focus on the turnovers. You focus on the read. You focus on the process. And that's the difference. And when Brian Kelly was the coach, it was don't turn it over, don't turn it over, don't turn it over. That can't be the mindset. Of course you can't turn it over. But it's not focusing on the turnover, it's focusing on the process. Yeah. And that's what you clean up, but you can't clean up you can't change the mindset. I love the aggressiveness, but that guy's getting underneath that seam, which is why you didn't have as much room as you did 2 plays before when you won. Because that's what I think happened to Riley. He had that play 2 plays before, and he wanted it again. And yeah. 100%. And so he forced it. Right? Okay, I get it. I like that mindset. You can't force it. The second one was just a terrible read. He didn't see the guy. I mean, it wasn't, I don't think he was trying to force a ball into double coverage.
No,
I don't think he saw deny Dennis Sutton dropping into coverage.
No, I don't think so either.
He made no attempt to get it over that kid. Just don't think he saw him. You can't make that mistake. That's not a mindset thing, though.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen him do that in games where he was being less aggressive. Can't do that. I want the aggressiveness.
It was funny, too, because in the broadcast when that happened, they were like, yeah, like, I understand, like, trying to fit it over him. And I was like, no, he just didn't see him.
Who said he was trying to fit it over him?
The broadcast crew.
No, he was not. That was a rope. He was not at all trying to fit it over that guy. He didn't see him.
No. They're like, yeah, like it's, you know, Evans was open if you put a little bit more touch on it. But, you know, I think he just underestimated the size of denied Dennis Sutton. I was like, no, he just didn't see him.
He was trying to throw a rope back shoulder play to keep the safety from coming over.
Mm-hmm.
And if he puts air on it, the safety either drills Mitchell Evans or picks it off.
Yeah.
He didn't see him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but you can't make that mistake. You got to see him, right?
100%.
But it was a good call by Penn State too, dropping denied Dennis Sutton, who's been killing your offensive tackles in the coverage. It's good play calling there by Penn State. So the point is, you clean up those things and you focus on the process. The process is to be aggressive, but be aggressive within the structure of the offense. You know, like don't for that. Like that's the thing about the Georgia Tech interception. That just wasn't the read.
Right.
I love the aggressiveness, but like there was no reason to throw that football. It's not even about how can you can't turn it over there. No, it's like, dude, what did you see there that made you, coach, I'm trying to be aggressive. That's cool. I'm fine with that. But no, that's not the place for that because this is what he did. The focus isn't on trying to be aggressive. The focus is what's the read, right? It's not the pick that I'm worried about. It's the process.
Yeah.
Right. And the process is going to lead you to be more aggressive. And after that interception, he ripped Georgia Tech up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've liked about Riley. And that's why I feel like he needs to be more aggressive because sometimes when he's had an early turnover, he's gone out and played really well after that. I'm not advocating for an early turnover because that can get you down 14-0 real quick against Ohio State. Totally. They go down and score, you get the ball, you turn it over, and then it's 14-0, and now you have to throw the ball. And they know you have to throw the ball. It's not what I'm talking about. You know, and I'm not saying it's he did well because of the turnover. What I'm saying is those are games where he's been more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Louisville game, he was more aggressive. And that's why they jumped out early. So they're going to need that mindset from him, Trev. No question about it.
Well, that's what I've loved about Riley Leonard. I won't lie. It took me a couple of games to get used to it. But, like, him being cool is his meal ticket. Like, that's what it is. Like, don't lose your cool. Like, that's what – it took me a while. You know, early in the season struggles, throws an interception, jogs off the field, joking with people on the sideline, sitting down laughing. But, like, I've learned now after watching him for 15 games, like, that's just how he copes. And I won't lie, he got a little close in that Penn State game to losing that cool. Like, because he was frustrated with himself, right? Like, it's not because he was mad at any other player for not doing their job. He's his own worst critic, and he's been, you know, quoted saying that. The offensive coaching staff has. But yeah, I mean, it's his resiliency to bounce back and to have that short memory, because that is one aspect about playing quarterback that's really difficult that not a lot of people talk about, is flushing bad plays, because everything that you do is so highlighted, and Riley Leonard does a really good job of it, man. He really does. And without it, they wouldn't have had that second half that they did. If he wasn't aggressive, if he didn't flush the bad plays, I mean, it was awesome to see, man. It was really, really good to see. So, going to do it for the second portion where we kind of gave the overview of the Ohio State defense. What we're going to do now is we're going to kind of provide some numbers and stack it up on paper just to put some numbers behind some of the things that we're talking about here. But, folks, before we get there, be sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell and share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. The best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian. So for part 3 of the show today, we are going to be diving into what the numbers tell us in each aspect of the Notre Dame offense and the Ohio State defense. And first, we're going to take a look at what we had talked about being a matchup that Notre Dame has to win in order to run the style of offense that they want to, right? And it's no secret that we're starting around talking with the run game, because that is Notre Dame's bread and butter. That's what they've been able to do. So you go through and you dive in and you look at their yards per game. They're 14th in the country. They average over 200 rushing yards per game. I can almost guarantee you they'd be inside of the top 10 if you take out or if you only factor in Power 5 opponents, right? Because I'm sure that there's all the service academies are ranked ahead of them in rushing yards per game, things like that. But the numbers that we really pay attention to are yards per attempt, the efficiency numbers. Yeah, Brian.
They are right now, because of the postseason, they are now, first, second, third, fourth, fifth in rushing yards per game amongst Power 5 teams. And it's UCF, Tennessee, Kansas State, and Kansas. Okay. But they were second going into the postseason. They've obviously played a little bit tougher competition the first 2 rounds,
slightly
than other people. Yes,
yeah, pretty decent run defenses.
Yeah, they are number 4 in rushing yards per game against Power 5 opponents.
Okay.
So it's people say, well, they average 202.8 yards per game against Power 5 opponents, and they're the number 2 offense in the country in yards per carry against Power 5 teams, just because I know that's where you're going to go next.
Yep. Thank you, sir. So the numbers that we pay attention to are efficiency numbers, and they're 4th in the country right now in yards per attempt at 5.8. They have 44 rushing touchdowns on the season, which ranks them 3rd in all of college football. And we talked about how Notre Dame doesn't have as much of an explosive downfield passing offense. Where their explosive plays come from is the run game. And you see it there. Mm-hmm. They have 18 rushes of over 30 yards, which ranks them, once again, top 5 in the country at 4th. Tackles for loss allowed, they rank inside of the top 40. So like it's decent, right? It could be better, but they've allowed 69 tackles for a loss for 230 yards. Brian, this is what the Notre Dame rush offense has been all year, man. And I will say in the postseason, it's slowed up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because to your point, it's the level of competition went up. But in the moments where they needed to, where it doesn't look as sexy on the stat sheet, where you don't walk away from it saying, oh man, 200 yards per game against the number 1 rushing defense in the country in round 1, you rush for a $190. It was somewhere over 190. It was somewhere in the 194 to 196 range. Might have been 196, I believe. But you go for a $196 in the first round. Second round against Georgia, another good
193.
Run. 193. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And in the second round, you go against Georgia. On paper, not a better run defense than Indiana's, right? But they were able to, bad matchup for Notre Dame up front. They shut down Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price outside of a couple plays. But the catalyst there, once again, was Riley Leonard, who rushed for 80 yards on 14 carries for that game. Then you get to Penn State. Again, stat sheet doesn't look crazy awesome. They're not going for over 200 yards. But what they were able to do, they were able to rush for over 100 yards in just the second half alone. Once they started to turn it up a little bit, they did things different schematically. Personnel changed a little bit. So, Brian, this is what the Notre Dame rush offense is, and it's been slightly different from regular season to postseason. But in the moments where they've needed to, depending on who it is, different players have stepped up to make it effective.
Well, I mean, that's what football is, right? I mean, you don't dominate in the postseason the same way you do statistically, but you still got to be good at it, right? I mean, they didn't rip up Indiana the same way they did some other opponents, but they still did what they needed to do in some key moments. Of course, they didn't run on Georgia, but like going to that game, I didn't say, hey, they got to get to 200 against Georgia, man. I said, well, they got to get to $150. You know, first half against Penn State, the run game was terrible. They ran for 101 yards in the second half against the defense in Penn State that, I mean, gives up just over that for an entire game. I mean, Penn State's rush defense this season ranked the 9th in the country. They only give up 101.8 yards per game. Notre Dame did that just 0.9 behind that. They were 101.88, so 101.9. They were 0.9 in the second half. They were 0.9 behind what they have done all year in the second half. So it's been a couple stretches where the run game couldn't get going. But for the most part, they've still been good when you consider what they're going against in the postseason. I mean, you look at what they've done in the postseason, Trev. They did it against the number 1, number 9 rush defenses of college football. You know, Georgia's rush defense is 36. That's the bad one that you faced. And you've still done what you needed to do to win those games. And so that's your bread and butter. That's who you are. That's what got you here. And you're going against a team that statistically has been very, very good at shutting that down. And we'll dive into that a little bit too. But like, I just kind of feel like, Trevor, you need Riley Leonard to be able to run the football. I mean, you need Riley Leonard to throw the football if you're going to win this game. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, it's like, if you're really going to win a championship, what got you here has to kind of get you there. I mean, it has to be on its game. It needs to be, you got to be good at it. I'm not saying you got to be lights out and you got to light the world on fire and run for 250 yards. If they run for 200 yards in this game, I feel like, okay, it's going to be hard to beat them. But you've got to be able to move the chains. You've got to be able to be good on first down. You've got to be able to, you know what I mean? Like, it's those type of things that you're going to have to do. And if you can't run the ball, I think it is going to be hard to win this game because of your offense. You're going to need your defense to have a Herculean effort. You're going to have to find some ways to run the football against them. But as we've seen, and what I love about Notre Dame's rush defense, Trevor's, or rush offenses, they've had to do this against some really good rush defenses. Notre Dame has played the number 1, the number 9, the number 16, the number 17 rushing, and the number 30 rush defenses in the country. They faced 5 rush defenses that rank in the top 30. Ohio State has faced 4 rushing offenses that have ranked in the top 30, right? So it's one more. It's close, but that's one more. And if you look at Notre Dame and you go to the top 50, 8 of Notre Dame's opponents ranked in the top 50 in rushing defense. Only 5 of Ohio State's opponents ranked in the top 50 in rushing offense. 2 of those were Marshall and Western Michigan. So, that factors, that context matters, is that Notre Dame is, not to say that Ohio State's numbers are inflated. They're not. Because they shut down some of those teams that were really good at running, like, Penn State,
right,
or Tennessee was a top 10 rushing offense this year, and they shut that offense down. I mean, they completely shut down their rush offense. Tennessee finished the year 9th, and Ohio State shut them down. And Penn State this season was finished 18th in rushing offense. We saw how good it was against Notre Dame, you know what I mean? And they shut that down. I mean, Penn State went for $152 running the ball against Ohio State. You and I watched that same game, Trev. A lot of that was late and scrambles by Nico from the quarterback position, like pass game rushing yards. They weren't exactly like, and then, Penn State went for $120 against Ohio State. Now, Penn State fans all week last week was like, oh, well, that's because, so-and-so was injured or what. But I don't care. They still shut them down, and so they've performed well against the better teams on their schedule. But Ohio State has also played a lot of, 5 of their opponents ranked 96 or lower. Let's see here. For 9 of their opponents ranked outside of the top 70 in rushing offense. So they haven't played a lot of teams run the ball like Notre Dame, if we're being honest, and they definitely haven't played teams that are the big play offenses. Penn State and Tennessee are more grinded out rushing offenses. Notre Dame's more of a big play rushing offense. Does that matter or not? I don't know. We're going to find out. But, it needs to be pointed out. I mean, we talked all year about how Tennessee always ranked ahead of Notre Dame in yards, but they did it on 100 more carries, because Notre Dame averaged such a higher yards per carry than Tennessee. And it's still true now. Tennessee ranks 9th in college football and at 5.03 yards per carry, but they're 9th at 225.9 yards per game. Notre Dame is 14th. They're at 5.8 yards per carry at 210.8 yards per game. So Notre Dame is now, 42 carries on the season below. If you put Notre Dame's obviously yards per carry on there and the same number of carries, they would rush for well over what Tennessee has. It's just a different type of offense. Dylan Thompson's a heck of a back. He's a very different running back from Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Is that going to matter? I don't know. We're going to find out. But I think this matchup is definitely a good on good matchup. And Notre Dame is going to have to find a way to be successful to run the ball. And I don't care, Trevor, if it's because they got a 98-yard run and not a whole lot else outside of that. I don't care. Just get the yards, get the scores. That's the key. And the run game's going to have to be a part of that.
Yeah, we started out this show, and really the common theme of this week and throughout the postseason has been, what does winning look like? You know what I mean? What does having success on the ground look like against a top defense in the country that Notre Dame has faced, right? I mean, IU had the number 1 rush defense Penn State had the number 9 rush defense, but you go through and you look, and the Ohio State numbers kind of show you and give you an idea of what winning looks like, right? It doesn't mean that Notre Dame lives up to their standard of 210 yards. If Notre Dame rushes for 210 yards on this Ohio State offense, this game is not close. I'm telling you that right now. But that's not the expectation, nor do I believe it should be. But then you go through and you look at like even Ohio or even Indiana, right? Indiana, I believe, coming into that game, averaged somewhere around 80 rushing yards per game, similar to what Ohio State's allowing right now. Even for the crowd, that's where you take away the 98-yard run, which I think is BS, and I don't really buy into it at all either. But even if you do that, Notre Dame rushed for more yards in a game, 20 or so more in a game than what IU allowed on the season, right? So those are the numbers that you have to pay attention to when we talk about Notre Dame won in the trenches, because some people will just look at the final box score and say, what do you mean they won? They rushed for 147 yards. That's correct, they did. That's 68 more rushing yards than what Ohio State allows for on the season, right? You start looking at their yards per attempt. They're second in the country at yards per attempt at 2.7. That's spectacular. It is. Like, there's no other way to explain that than spectacular. But with that being said, Notre Dame averages 5.8 yards on the ground. Winning for Notre Dame doesn't mean they go for 5.8 or 6 on the ground. But if they go for 4, 4.5, sure, it's under Notre Dame's average, but you're almost doubling what Ohio State is allowed on the ground. So that is kind of to paint the picture for some people that might not understand. To me, that's what winning looks like in these matchups, right? Winning doesn't necessarily mean dominating. You know, the common theme for us has been, you know, talking about winning versus a Stanford versus a Virginia versus a Miami of Ohio is going to look different than winning against an IU, a Penn State, a Georgia, and Ohio State, right? So to help paint that picture, that's what that looks like, at least for me. Brian, it sounds like you're in the same boat as well. It's like that's kind of what winning looks like. You know what I mean? So you go through and you dive into the rest of their numbers, right? They don't allow a whole lot of rushing touchdowns. They rank top 10 in the country in that as well. With just
they punked Texas into running that toss.
Yeah, they did.
They punked Texas into that because of how dominant they are in those goal line situations. They're very hard to run on in those situations.
Extremely. Really good red zone defense, which I know we'll talk about later too. But they also, again, we said at the start of the show that they keep everything in front of them, right? And they don't allow a whole lot of big runs of 30 yards or more. Same thing with Ohio State's defense, man. Like they've allowed 3 in 15 games. 15 games, they've allowed 3 runs of 30 yards or more. You know, so that's going to be another matchup that I'm paying attention to if I'm a Notre Dame fan going into this game. Can Notre Dame rip off an explosive run? Will Ohio State be able to contain these backs? So a lot of questions swirling around, but folks, this is what Ohio State's done on defense this year in pertains to the run game. And with as much talk as there is about their secondary and Caleb Downs and Denzel Burke, this is the part of their defense that has not been talked about enough because it's been really, really good. Really
it is. And as I said, you put some context into who they played in this number, but they played the number 9 rushing team in the country in the first round of the playoff and basically shut them down. You know, they played the number 18 rushing offense in the country in Penn State and held them to 130 some yards, 120 some yards. Let me pull it up. It was 120 yards. Marshall is the number 19 rushing team in the country. They held them to 125 yards. Iowa's the number 24 rushing team in the country. They held them to 116 yards. Western Michigan's the number 37 rushing team in the country. They held them to 28 yards. Indiana's the number 62 rushing offense in the country. They held them to 83 yards. Honestly, the only reason Indiana ranks that low is because they had to play both Notre Dame and Ohio State.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because Notre Dame held them to 63 yards and Ohio State held them to 83 yards. You take those 2 games out and Indiana ran the ball pretty well this year. You know what I mean? So that kind of factors into it as well, but that's what you need to do. And look, Notre Dame has gone over the opponent's average in all 3 games so far. The question is going to be how much further do they need to go beyond what Ohio State's giving up? So basically Ohio State's giving up 90 yards a game. Against Indiana, and this is what their average is now, not what it was with before Notre Dame. I could factor it in the other way, but you see where I'm going with this. They had 113 more yards against Indiana than Indiana allowed all year. they had 24 more rushing yards against Georgia than Georgia had allowed all year on average. They had 15 more yards against Penn State than Penn State had allowed all season. Now, the asterisk there is if you look at what Notre Dame did in the second half, they almost got to that season average in the second half. They had 101 yards. So is 15 yards past Ohio State's 90 going to get it done? No. I don't know. I mean, can you beat Ohio State passing for 105? You can. It's just going to be incredibly hard. Yeah. I don't want to speak in absolutes because if you'd have told me they're going to beat Penn State and move the ball really well in the second half and Notre Dame's only going to rush for 117 yards, I'd have been like, I don't believe you. I don't know. I don't. Or I'm like, man, Riley's going to rip them up, right? I mean, yeah. I think you need to go more than 24 you had against Georgia. I don't know that 114 yards is going to get the job done. I don't think you need to be 113 like you did against Indiana, although I wouldn't mind it. You know what I mean? Because then you add basically Notre Dame would rush for 203 yards in that instance, which I could live with. Yeah, but if you take away the 2 80-yard touchdown runs, they didn't. Okay, cool. Let's have that conversation.
Yep. And if you took 2 of their touchdowns away, they would have scored 13 points.
Right. So that's the thing is like they're going to have to run the ball on Ohio State. The question is how much and how frequently. And that's kind of where I'm at I think that they're going to have to find a way to do it. And part of it is you've got to be willing to go right at them. Like a lot of teams are not willing to go right at them. Yes, you have to do some things to mess with the linebacker eye discipline. You've got to run some jets. I'm okay running some jets and doing some different things there. You've got to run some misdirection. I would love to see some read zone. And I think part of the reason they don't run a lot of read zone is because Riley just always keeps it. And when it's not supposed to keep it, it results in a negative. So I think I don't know if they do as much of that anymore. Maybe do some RPO with it in this game and hopefully you can have some success with it especially if they're playing off coverage outside. But at the end of the day, Trev, it's going to come down to however you do it, you've got to be able to get the run game going. That means the offensive line has to play physical. What helped Iowa in Michigan State early against Ohio State is that you will go break down that film. They were coming off and they were fighting hard against Ohio State. And Ohio State had their D-line, had their fair share of wins. But they also had some plays they drove those guys off the ball and opened up big runs. And when the linemen can get to the second level, those linebackers are a lot like Notre Dame's linebackers have been in the past, where they're not, like Cody Simon's not the biggest kid. I know he's listed at, but J.D. Bertrand is also listed at 235. Jack Kaiser's also listed at like 230 plus. When the linemen are getting up to the second level, they're way less effective. But that doesn't happen if you don't get a good push at the line of scrimmage.
Right.
The line's got to come in with a mindset of we got nothing left. Right? There's nothing you're holding out for. There's no, I got to save something for next week. This is it. You got to play your absolute tails off, but you also have to scheme it well. And you have to avoid some of the negatives you had against Penn State. That's going to be another thing. And so they can run the ball on them. It's a battle. You're going to have to play really well up front. You're going to have to, be very physical at the point of attack. You talk about who's going to start it on the offensive line. I don't know. What's a perfect world scenario? Rocco's fine. And you start him at right guard and Charles Jagasaw at left guard. Now you have a big offensive line that's physical. But even if you have to go with Jagasaw at right guard and Tosh Baker at left tackle, that was your starting line. That was your lineup in the second half when you ran for 101 yards against Penn State. That was your lineup last year, flipped, right? I mean, Jagasaw was at left tackle. But you're much closer to the starting lineup you had in the bowl game against Oregon State last year when you ran for over 200 yards, right? I mean, Oregon State's not Ohio State. Ohio State's not Oregon State, but you get the point. You're going to have to find ways to do it and go right at them. It's not what you just don't run inside zone and duo every single play every game.
Right.
Like, you can't be afraid to go at them. Yes, mix in your counters. Yes, mix in some of your wrap stuff. Yes, mix in some different things that you like to do. But you got to be willing to go right at them. You have to be willing to go right at them and try to get some movement on them. Because the way they play, they don't run as much of the twists and stunts. If you catch them in a slant, because like sometimes they're going to slant right into your run and blow you up. It's just going to happen. But you're going to catch them sometimes when they're slanting away from where you're trying to go, and it's going to open up the cutback lane beautifully. And you got to be willing to go at it. And it's okay sometimes to get +2 and +2 and get into 3rd and 6. You got to make those third down plays, right? But because eventually you're gonna hit that. You're gonna hit that play. And that's where this offense is gonna have to be. If they can't run the ball, they're gonna have a hard time winning. This thing can't be done, but it's gonna be much harder, Trev.
Yeah, significantly. Again, it's the common theme is it's what's got Notre Dame here, and it's what you do the best offensively. And when you're able to run the football, that is when they are at their best. Now, I will say the second facet of Notre Dame's offense, where they are going to have to win and they are going to have to take some shots, is in the passing game. And that matchup between the Notre Dame passing game and the Ohio State secondary, I think when you compare all of the matchups on paper, which is what we're doing right now, I do believe that this one is the most lopsided, right? Notre Dame's run defense versus Ohio State's run game, comparable. Notre Dame's pass game versus, Ohio State's pass game versus Notre Dame's pass defense, another best on best conversation. Notre Dame's run game versus Ohio State's run defense, another best on best scenario. This one, from a paper standpoint, is the one where Ohio State holds the clear advantage. And you can kind of dive in and take a look at the numbers for yourself. You know, Notre Dame ranks outside of the top 100 in college football in passing yards per game at 194.3. Now, sometimes, and I know we don't really pay attention to total output because you have to factor in short fields. You have to talk about their run game success. But in the key efficiency numbers that we look at, in yards per attempt and yards per completion, they don't rank that highly in that either. In yards per attempt, Notre Dame right now is at 7.1, which ranks them at 79th in the country. They are at 10.6 yards per completion, which ranks 119th in the country. And when you factor in the fact that there's only 134 teams in college football and 3 of those teams in the FBS, and when 3 of those teams are Army, Navy, and Air Force, that kind of makes that number look a little daunting, right? Their completion percentage, 13th in the country. So when they do decide to pass the ball, not decide to pass the ball, because Riley Leonard, I think there is this misconception that he passes the ball like 8 times a game, which is not the case. So he is an accurate passer, and he is having a more accurate second half of the season than he did the first. But completion percentage is up. They don't rank that high in passing touchdowns, right? 3 of those don't even belong to Riley. Riley Leonard has 19 passing touchdowns on the season, but as a team, they have 22, which ranks inside of the top 50, just barely. Interceptions, they are 32nd in the country. Pass efficiency, they're at 50th.
Part of that, by the way, too, Trevor, is the fact that they've played 15 games.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And then you go and dive into the pass efficiency numbers, which I know 50 is nothing to write home about. People aren't jumping out of their seats to see that they're at 50th. But considering at one point in the season they were 129th, that is a significant improvement to where they were at. Again, their explosive plays on offense all live in not all, but mostly live in the run game. You know, their top 5 in explosive run plays, I believe, are up there. And in passing plays of 30 yards or more, they are 112th in the country because they have 12. One of them came against Penn State, right? So do with that number that you will. Sacks allowed based on the offensive line play throughout the season, just due to injuries and the inconsistent lineups. Argument could be made that if it wasn't for Riley Leonard, that number would be significantly higher than 23, right? But they have 23 sacks allowed on the season, which ranks them 44th. So in a nutshell, on paper, Brian, this is what Notre Dame's pass offense is this year. And with Mike Denbrock coming to town and the hype of adding Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison and the development of Jaden Greathouse, I think we can say that it didn't live up to what we had hoped, unfortunately. But the passing game has done what they've needed to in certain games to get it done, right? Against Louisville, they had that long touchdown to Jaden Greathouse. We all know what Jaden Greathouse did against Penn State, what Mitchell Evans and Aeneas Williams did against Penn State. So in the moments where they've needed to, they've stepped up and performed. But season review, man, this is where they're at, Brian.
What's interesting is this is the one where I think a lot more context is needed when looking at the Ohio State offense, because I think a case could be made. They did a great job against Indiana. Can't take that away. But that was just because they couldn't protect the quarterback.
Sure.
And it wasn't so much about the coverage being great. They played 3 games against teams that ranked in the top 30 in passing offense, if you count Oregon twice. And in those 3 games, they gave up 307.8 yards per game. So the rankings for the teams they played 4 teams ranked in the top 50. The number 59 team, the 5th best, is Akron. They played 6 offenses that rank 109th or lower. And 8 of their games came against teams that ranked out of the top 75 in passing. So I do think there needs to be a little bit of context. This isn't meant to mean that Ohio State's pass defense isn't really good. It is really good. I'm simply pointing out that I do think that there is a level of they have benefited to some degree playing teams that aren't very good at throwing the football. That's kind of where I'm coming from on that one. You know what I mean? And yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that. But I think that's been kind of a factor. Now but sure. Notre Dame is not a team that's really good at throwing football either. But one thing I will say is I do think that Notre Dame's numbers over the course of the season are a little better than they show. And a big part of that is, Riley Leonard really struggled in the first really 4 games of the season. Since really the Louisville game, he's been a better player. He's been a more efficient player. His quarterback rating has gone up. I'm going to actually do that math here while we're talking, Trevor, but he has been better, but it's not like, okay, he's been better, so now all of a sudden they've got a top 20 pass offense.
Right.
I'm not saying that. But here's the end of the day. Yeah, okay, it hasn't been great, but it has stepped up. And it's funny, 25%, I think my math here is correct, Trevor. Correct me if I'm wrong. 25% of their passing plays of 30 yards or more came against Penn State. You had 3.
Gosh.
You had the Mitchell Evans play on the first drive. You had the Aeneas Williams sluggo, and you had the 54-yard touchdown to Jaden Greathouse.
Wow.
So, that kind of factors into it a little bit.
Sure.
Can they build on that? I don't know. But then the answer is, but look what they did the week before, against Georgia. That's the thing is we just don't know what this offense is going to look like throwing the football. Riley did some really nice things against Indiana's pressure in the second game. In the first playoff game. So that's where I come down to, Travis. I still don't know what to make of this Notre Dame pass offense. But what I do know and what I can confidently say is that Riley Leonard's going to have to be the good version of Riley Leonard in this game. Yeah. Whatever you think about, what they are and then what the numbers are, I think we can all agree that when Riley Leonard's on, he can hurt you with his arm. We've seen it all year. It's just, will he do it? That's really kind of the question at this point in time is will he be able to do it? We're going to find that out, right? But he's going to need to be on his game. You're going to need like Navy version of Riley Leonard. You're going to need Army version of Riley Leonard. You're even going to, even if you get Virginia version, which he had some big time, had the one big time throw that was called back, but you're going to need, and not numbers wise, but just Riley came out in those games aggressive, accurate, throwing on time. That's what we're referring to. Not like you got to produce against them the way you produce Armies. It's not about the opponent. It's about Riley. It's about what version of Riley Leonard we saw. When you think about how he was in the second half against USC and some of the big throws he made against USC. That's what I'm referring to. You're going to need that version. You're going to need the Penn State version of Riley that's aggressive, that's not afraid of making a mistake, that's going to go out there and make some big time throws. You can't get the Georgia version of Riley that just is just unwilling to throw the football. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. But at the end of the day, even if you get that, they're going to need the pass catchers to be better. And the good news is I actually do think the pass catchers have played better recently. Yeah. I think they played well against Indiana. I think they played well against Georgia when given the opportunity. And I think they played very well against Penn State.
Yeah.
Now, I know Greg McElroy just thinks the DB fell on a blade of grass. I love Greg McElroy. He's one of the few ESPN people I really like. As I've said before, he just had some takeaways. He's much better on his podcast than he is as a commentator, because I think in the commentator, he just gives too much of the ESPN crap. And that was a great play by Jaden Greathouse. Crossover that guy.
Yeah.
Aeneas Williams, it's a great play call, great execution. Mitchell Evans was covered, dude. You know, I mean, just Riley said, hey, I'm gonna throw it up there. Jaden Greathouse was covered on that back shoulder. He got pressured and got hit, but got the ball out, made the play, and Jaden Greathouse went and made a great catch. So it wasn't just, okay, yeah, you threw the wide open. You were hitting plays in that game no matter what. And those are things that I think you need that same level of aggressiveness against Ohio State. I just will hope they don't wait till they're down 10-0 to do it.
Yeah, the success in the pass game is a group effort, right? For Notre Dame, it's for me, it's 1A, 1B. It's the performance of the offensive line and Riley Leonard willing to come out and take shots early. That's 1A, 1B for me. But not far behind it is the play of the wide receivers. Hasn't been that much of an issue in the postseason, like you had mentioned, Brian. But there were moments in the regular season where you questioned their get up off the line of scrimmage, where you questioned their sense of urgency running routes and getting in and out of breaks, and honestly, like at times fighting for the football. You know, like there were some moments where Notre Dame's receivers weren't really doing a whole lot to go up and make those contested catches. So I am happy to see what we did see against Penn State. But going back to what you had talked about for Ohio State, I think both can be true, right? Like I think you can say that Ohio State has a really good pass defense, and they played very few really good passers throughout their season. I think both things can be true. Right, the two best passers that they faced in their season were in the regular season, Dylan Gabriel, who ripped them up, and Curtis Rourke, who only passed the ball 18 times, you know, because the pass rush was getting home. And that is part of pass defense, right? Like your pass rush is a factor and a facet of your passing defense. But then, you know, you get to the playoffs and you start looking at who they played from a passing standpoint. There were a lot of questions about Nico's ability. Brian, you brought that up in the pregame show that we did. And in the IB countdown to kickoff was, if this game turns into Nico having to throw the ball around the yard for Tennessee to win, I don't like their chances.
Right.
And
because they're not the same team they were with Hendon Hooker 2 years ago.
Right.
And not even just because of Nico, but because of everything else around him.
Right.
They don't have the same receivers. They don't have Jalen Hyatt. They don't have the guys they had a couple years ago. They don't have Cedric Wilson. They don't have those group of guys. This is a different group. Right. And they're not built that way. Mm-hmm. They weren't built that way. And Ohio State's offense put them in. And that's the concern about this game is if Ohio State's offense comes out on fire and you can't answer with your run game and you put yourself in a situation where you have to throw the ball, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, and you go through and you just look at some of the pocket passers that Ohio State's pass defense has faced, because it has been very minimal, right?
Cedric Tillman. My guy Jay Henry is Cedric Tillman.
Yep.
Thank you, Jay.
And you go through and you look, and in the playoffs specifically, you face a true freshman in Nico, or redshirt freshman in Nico, that he's just not really refined yet as a passer. You see the potential, right? But on that stage against that defense, you know, just wasn't going to happen if the game was in his hands. And then, you know, you go to the Oregon game, and like even in a game without Evan Stewart, and Tez Johnson was in and out of the lineup throughout the majority of that game, Dylan Gabriel still did throw an interception, pass for 299 yards and 2 touchdowns. You know, Quinn Ewer's ability to push the ball down the field. Now, there is a lot of questions around with as much experience as Quinn Ewers has, his gap escape ability and his pocket presence was not all that great in that game, if I'm being 100% honest. But he was even still able to rip off 283 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns. And, you know, it's not like they have faced a bunch of passing quarterbacks this year. You know, it's kind of been like feast or famine for him. You know, Aiden Chillis at Michigan State, he's more of an athletic guy. He's young. He has some stuff that he has to kind of grow into. I mean, Riley Leonard is a much better quarterback than Davis Warren. You know what I mean? From a passing and rushing standpoint, rushing obviously, but from a passing standpoint too. So I think you do have to look at Ohio State's pass defense numbers with a little bit of context. And you can also admit that it's also still a really darn good pass defense too. Right. So I'm with you, man. I think both things can definitely be true.
And then also it's like you can still be a really good group and another team matches up well against you.
Totally.
And that's where I think that I do have some sliver of hope that Notre Dame can throw the football against Ohio State, because if you're a team that relies on like big physical outside receivers against this secondary, you're in trouble, because Denzel Burke and Davidson and Bignosin, that's their bread and butter, right? That's what they do, right? So hold on a second. You think of if you had if your offense was completely built around Bo Collins and Jaden Thomas outside, I'm not as feeling good about it, because that's not where you want to be going at them, is all day outside. That doesn't mean you don't go at them. I'm just saying if that's all you're going to win or lose based on that matchup, that's not where you want to be.
Yeah.
Where you can have some success against them is tight end production, slot production, backs out of the backfield, those type of things. That's where you're going to need to make plays. And then speed on the outside. And do they have the speed on the outside? No, they got some quickness, right? But that's just not where Notre Dame is good. Notre Dame is good there. Where you can beat them outside is with speed. That's where teams beat them out. Matthew Golden running by guys. Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart running by guys. That's not who Notre Dame is. Now, if Notre Dame had Will Fuller, then I'd say, hey, man, drop back and throw bombs. Put Will Fuller on Denzel Burke all game. But that's not who Notre Dame is. And where I think they're vulnerable, in my opinion, as far as the consistency, moving the chains and going at them, is being able to attack Sonny Styles with the throwing game. Being able to go at Lathan Ransom with the throwing game. Because you know what that does? If he has to cover, he's not coming downhill. Right? That's what I'm talking about. Getting Sonny Styles. I mean, if they're bringing pressure and you're beating them with crossing routes like you did last year, they got to back off that pressure. That's what I'm saying. And Notre Dame has the potential to hurt them there. Not a lot of teams do. And that's why I think that's an area where you're going to have some success. Now, that's not easy because we're talking about an elite defense.
Right.
It requires you to play really good football. What I'm saying, however, is you have the personnel with Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Jaden Harrison and your running backs to have some success there. That's where I'm coming from. And that's why I think that's where I'm nervous about this matchup. Very much so, Trevor, because I think Ohio State can lock Notre Dame's pass offense down. I do think they can.
Yeah.
But I do have some optimism that there's a road for Notre Dame to be able to throw the ball in this game. Those guys are going to have to play really well, though. Because why did the stuff to Mitchell Evans work last year? Because he made a couple like just insane catches, just like he did against Penn State. Just like Jane Gray. That's what you have to do against great defenses. It's not going to be, you're not going to beat these guys by 4 or 5 yards like you did Army and, but there are places to go. And then with the outside stuff, I think that's where you can get a lot of chain moving throws we haven't seen them get in the postseason. If they're playing off, they'll give you a post out. They'll give you a comeback. They'll give you a speed out. They'll give you some of those throws. Take them in early downs. Take them. Those are hey, you got 7 on 1st and 10. Cool. But the big plays, the plays where they're going to really need to take advantage, I think those things are happening against their linebackers and their safeties. And they can have success there. They can do it. And they're one of the few teams that has the personnel there to do it. And we're going to see if they can do it. I mean, because like you look at the Texas game, I mean, that's a big part of how Texas got them.
Yeah.
Was getting them out of the backfield.
Yeah,
they're shots out of the backfield. They're tight end and they're running backs. I mean, that's something that they did very well against Ohio State and Notre Dame. You said because sometimes, Trev, you look at a game, you're like, yeah, I can't replicate that. I don't have that. Like, I can watch the Oregon game all you want and be like, dude, man, they can't cover guys like Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. You going to incorporate that in your play calling? No, because we don't have Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart. It's not replicable against Notre Dame. They don't have those players. But when I watch what Texas did, when I watch what Michigan State did in the first half, I'm like, hey, they can do that. And Notre Dame has better players than some of those teams. So that's kind of where I look at it. Who was making the plays against Penn State? With all due respect to the outside receivers, it was Mitchell Evans, it was Jaden Greathouse, and it was Aeneas Williams. Right? Like that's where Notre Dame is impactful there. And then let Jaden Thomas and Bo Collins have the chain moving plays. Hit that out cut against. I mean, if they're going to play cover 3 or even off man where Denzel's opening up with his butt to the sideline, which he'll do at times, bang that 10-yard out cut, bang that 5-yard out cut, and just steal 6-7 yards on those instances. So there's things you can do there, but you've got to be willing to go at their linebackers and safeties. And far too many teams have been unwilling to do that. That doesn't mean, like somebody said earlier, you're going to pick on Caleb Downs. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. It's not that. It's looking for matchups, going at guys that can be beat, but then using some of the things that those guys do well against them, which is come downhill. Use that against them. If you can do that, then you can find some chunk plays. And that's what the pass game needs to be. It's not that they're going to go 31 of 45, 355 yards. It could only be $190, but they're big plays. I mean, I'd like to get over 200 and not because you're trailing, but it needs to be those big plays. I mean, against Penn State, what did Notre Dame throw for against Penn State? Riley went for 223.
Yeah.
I mean, but 300, almost half those yards came on, actually over half those yards, about half those yards came on 3 catches. I can live with that. The rest were chain movers. I can live with that. But you got to be able to find those opportunities against their secondary, which is very good. It's going to require, hey, man, it's one-on-one. I got to give my guy a shot. Give him a shot in a place where it's not going to get picked. Be smart about it, but got to give my guy a shot. Got to give my guy a shot. And if you can make those plays, then you're going to be good.
100%. 100%. There's a big difference between be willing to attack and picking on somebody, right? Like picking on somebody's like what teams try to do to Leonard Moore at the start of the season, the second Ben Morrison went out. It's like, hey, there's a true freshman in. We're going after that guy. Then you learn the hard way. But where offenses become dormant against Ohio State is when they're not willing to attack the middle of the field because they have a 6'4" linebacker and Caleb Downs kind of roaming the back end of the defense, right? Like it's just, I'm with you, man. I watched the Oregon film against Ohio State with a grain of salt because it's like, yeah, it's cool to say, but Notre Dame doesn't have the speed at receiver that Tez Johnson. The one guy that could potentially have that speed, they just don't use because that's just not who they are. So, it is what it is, right? But I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. One of the final things that we're going to kind of dive into is just looking at the offense and defense comparison overarching, right? And we're going to kind of compare where Notre Dame's offense is as a whole in comparison to where Ohio State's defense is as a whole. And to the surprise of what many people believe, Notre Dame is top 10 in the country in points per game. They rank number 6 in the country in points per game. You talk about their overall efficiency as an offense and yards per play. And they rank inside of the top 25. They're 6.4 yards per play. Now, I like to look at these numbers a lot from a situational standpoint, Brian, when I go through and look at this, because like total yards per game, we kind of have that conversation every week of, look, if Notre Dame's defense, I don't know, let's say is number 1 in the country in turnovers, which they are, you're going to have some shorter fields more times than not, right? So you go and you start looking at where they are efficiency-wise. And third down. Now, that has been a sore spot for Notre Dame's offense all year, but then in the biggest game that they had played in the Orange Bowl, they go, 11 for 17? Had their best offensive performance on third down in the biggest game of the season, right, to advance them to the national championship. As a whole, they don't really turn the ball over that much. The fumbling issues have gone away. I believe like that was a big issue like earlier in the season. Like they were losing some fumbles on special teams. Shadarian Price had that fumble on offense against Louisville. Riley Leonard had that one against Miami of Ohio. So those issues have been cleaned up. Interceptions, they're going to happen. They have 15 turnovers on offense on the year. 2 of those came against Penn State. He threw an interception against IU. So the turnover number as well, you kind of have to factor into the fact that they have played 15 games, So that is a piece of it. And then you go and look at what Notre Dame's offense has done in the red zone. Scoring percentage-wise, they're down. They're at 82.8. They rank 79th in the country. Some of that is because a lot of the kicking woes that they had to middle to the end of the season before Mitch Jeter was able to get right. Mitch Jeter got right. Red zone offense looks significantly better. Their ability to put points on the board looks significantly better. And part of that factored into it is the fact that their touchdown percentage is decent. They rank inside of the top 20 in the country. And when they do get inside of the 20, they've scored 42 touchdowns on offense. Another small factor too, Brian, we've talked about this before, with their red zone offense, they've ended a couple of games taking knees inside of the red zone as well, which the way that college football tracks their stats, that counts as a red zone possession, which is frustrating.
There's a lot of things that frustrate me about that. I mean,
yeah.
A big part of that too, Trevor, is the fact that they went through that little stretch where they couldn't make a field goal.
Yeah.
I mean, that crushed them. They're a top 15 red zone offense.
Yeah.
Just throw the numbers out. Like, because you mentioned there's like, 5 drives in 5 different games where, including, I think, 2 playoff games where Notre Dame's taken a knee. Against Indiana, I believe they had the ball. No.
Georgia, I think.
Georgia. Yeah. And there's not Virginia game. I think Army. There's been Miami, Ohio. There's like 5 games this year where Notre Dame's taken a knee at the end of the game in the red zone. Purdue. And that factors in. And the field goal kicking issues factor in. They're a top 15 red zone offense. And this is what it's going to come down to. It's situational football, like you mentioned, Trevor. I mean, Notre Dame's going to have to be able to put points on the board. And the way they're going to be able to put points on the board is maximize their possessions. When you get into the red zone, score touchdowns. You have to do it. And Notre Dame's been a great red zone offense this year. They really have. I mean, the only time I remember them getting stopped inside the 5 that I can remember is the drive against Army. It's the only time I really remember. I mean, Penn State couldn't do it. When Riley went and they got inside the 5-yard line twice. They scored 2 touchdowns against Penn State. They scored 2 touchdowns on 3 plays. And if I remember correctly, Trev, when we were talking about, Penn State's defense, Penn State was really good in the red zone defense, right? Remember where Penn State ranked? Who's the number 2 red zone touchdown defense in college football? It's Ohio State. Do y'all know who the number 1 red zone touchdown team in college football is? It's Notre Dame. I mean, it's Penn State.
Yep.
Penn State's number 1, and Notre Dame literally had 3 plays inside the 5 and got 2 touchdowns. But the key against Ohio State is, can you get inside the 5? That's gonna be the key, right? And a big part of that is going to be, Trev, is going to be that third down offense. It's a huge part of the game against Penn State. Huge part. One of the best third down performances I've seen from Notre Dame in a long time. Part of it was play calling. Part of it was Riley being a playmaker. Part of it was receivers being a playmaker. When you talk about Riley on the late third down where he's scrambling left and he hits Jaden Greathouse, that's also a great job by Jaden Greathouse to work open and look for the ball and not just assume Riley's going to run it.
That was one of the gripes that I had about the receiving core going into that game is when scramble drill ensues, they immediately look to start blocking or they just immediately cut off their route and become a spectator and start watching the game. So hats off to Greathouse on that one too.
Right. You look at some others. It was, the 3rd and 9 where Riley just, hey, I'm giving it's a 1-on-1, taking my shot, and Jaden Greathouse went and made a play. And that was the one thing that was a little different in this game. Mike Denbrock was very aggressive on 3rd down.
Yeah.
You have the 3rd and 6 on the first drive of the game. He runs a wheel route to Mitchell Evans for a big play. He's very aggressive in this game on 3rd down. And I think that's something that you need to be able to look at and say, hey, you got to be able to get at it. You know what I mean? So that's going to be a big key because, as you said, Trevor, this is a really good defense. And, if Notre Dame gets inside the 5, they're going to score. But can you get inside the 5? That's going to be the big question mark, and they don't give up a lot of big plays. You're going to need big plays to win. Those are all keys. They're a better 3rd down defense than you've been a 3rd down offense.
Right.
You're going to have to be good there. You're going to have to be better there. And again, the thing that gives you hope if you're a Notre Dame fan is that you just move the ball on a team that had a pretty good 3rd down defense. Penn State was much better. They finished the year 53rd, partly because Notre Dame went for over 60% against them, dropped them way down. I think they were in the 30s coming into that matchup last week. So those are all things that you look at and say, but you're going to have to be on top of your game. You're going to have to come out and let's see, what was Penn State? They were 30th in 3rd down defense last week, coming into last week's game, right? So just pointed that out. I didn't mean for it to come up like that, but that's what it did. So anyway, they were 30th and Notre Dame dropped them all the way to 53rd. Think about that. In one game this late in the year. They were 30th coming into the game. Well, now Ohio State's 30th. You're going to need to do that again. I don't know that you necessarily need to do like 11 of them and go. Like you're going to have to be good on 3rd down and move the chains.
Right.
A big difference in last year's game is Ohio State against a really good Notre Dame defense had a great third down performance. They didn't do a lot of things well on offense last year, but they moved the chains on third down. That was huge in a game where there wasn't a lot of scoring. Notre Dame's offense didn't move the ball well on third down. That was the ball game. I mean, if you can look at like this play, if it's not for this play, but I mean, the course of a 60-minute football game, that was the difference, in my opinion, was they were really good on third down. You weren't, and you couldn't force turnovers. So I think those are going to be factors in this game, Trev. If Notre Dame's going to have a chance to win this game, they're going to need to, play your game. That means run the football. That means Riley's got to be efficient, and you got to find some big plays here and there, even if it's Riley scrambling for 30 yards on a pass play. I don't really care. You've got to be great in the red zone. You got to protect the football without being conservative. But then you're also going to have to play better in some areas where maybe you don't normally thrive. And that's what happened against Penn State. They did some things they normally do. Second half, they ran the ball well. Riley made some big plays, but they were great on third down. And Mike Denbrock was phenomenal play calling wise, but at the end of the day, it doesn't take a genius to say, let's run a slot fade, and Riley, you got to make a great throw, and Jane Greathouse, you got to make a great catch.
Right.
Hey, right. Mitchell Evans, we're going to put you one-on-one against a linebacker. You got to go make a play. And you did. Yeah, I mean, that's also, Trev, why I do have some optimism that the offense can have success in this game, because they do have those playmakers. They just got to step up and make the plays.
Yeah, man. I mean, to put some numbers behind what you were talking about in last year's game for Ohio State, that situational football that we were talking about, Ohio State won in those areas. Nobody turned the football over in that game, so it was a clean game, so we can call that a wash. But Ohio State to Notre Dame last year is what Notre Dame did to Penn State this year on third down. Ohio State went 10 of 17 on third down. Notre Dame went 11 of 17 against Penn State.
Yep.
Ohio State went 1 of 3 on fourth down. Notre Dame went 0 for 2. You go through and you look at what they were able to do situationally. And then, of course, it comes down to the red zone. At the end of the game, where did Ohio State win? Chip Trayanum ran it in from 1 yard out.
And what did Penn State's offense do against Ohio State on third down this year? 3 of 11. You lost a 7-point game. You couldn't punch the ball in the end zone. You couldn't get a touchdown, and you couldn't get a touchdown in the end zone. You had 2 turnovers in the end zone, a pick and a turnover on downs. 2 times you got the ball inside the 10 and couldn't get points. And you couldn't convert change. You couldn't keep drives going because you couldn't be successful on third down. Guess what Ohio State did? They did those things, and that was a ball game.
Winning situational football has been key for Notre Dame all year long, man.
And Ohio State.
Yes.
And Ohio State.
Yes.
Because, again, this is not a typical, you look at this Ohio State roster, and you compare it to the 2015 roster. It doesn't come close. It doesn't come close to the 2015 roster. But this is a way better team than that was. With all due respect to JT and Jack Sawyer, they are not Nick Bosa. They are not. This linebacking core is not Darren Hall and Josh Perry. And I'm trying to remember the name of the middle linebacker they had that year that was really good. He was Curtis Grant. And then they also had Raekwon McMillan coming off the bench. All 4 of their starting DBs were first or second round draft picks. This team is not that team. Taylor Decker was their left tackle. They had Ezekiel Elliott at running back.
Michael Thomas at wide receiver.
Yes. But this team, this is one of the best Ohio State teams they've had in a long time, because they're not just out there out-athleting people. They're not out. They are very talented. Don't get me wrong. I'm giving them a compliment here. I would rather face the 2015 team than this team, because the 2015 team could get in their feelings and just decide not to play on any given Saturday, including a game late in the year when Michigan State's, the winner goes and plays for the Big Ten title. They say, I won't feel like playing today. This is a great team for Ohio State, and they're not going to beat themselves. You've got to beat them. In order to do that, Trevor, situational football is huge. Win the turnover battle. Be good on third down, both sides of the ball. When you get your scoring opportunities, you need 7, not 3. When they get scoring opportunities, they need to hold them to 3, not 7. And that when you're talking about 2 teams this good, those are the things that can make a difference in the game. Whose strength plays better? Is it the Ohio State pass offense, or is it the Notre Dame rush offense? Which one steps up and is better? Which complementary part of your offense is better? The Notre Dame pass game or the Ohio State run game? Those things all factor into winning, and a lot of that comes down to these things right here, Trev, this situational football that we talk about.
It's going to be key. It is absolutely going to be key. Well, that's going to do it for just kind of the overview of Ohio State versus Notre Dame and how they stack up on paper. But guys, ladies, gents, don't go anywhere because we are still going to break down the matchups that matter, right? We're going to dive into what do all these numbers mean? What are the areas that Notre Dame has to win on the field? But listen, before we get there, you guys know what to do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, and whatever platform you watch us on, whether it's Spotify podcast, Apple Podcasts. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. And of course, as always, the best way to support what we do here is go to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's where we have all of our exclusive content coming out. That's where we have film breakdowns, intel pieces around recruiting, transfer portal pieces. So it's where all the stuff is happening. So be sure to hit up the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Coach. Last section, we're going to be talking about the matchups that matter, right? We're going to talk about the areas that Notre Dame's offense has to win. And the common theme of today is winning can look a little different, right? It's not just going through. And now I would not be upset if they dominated in all of these areas, but winning can look a little bit different. Some of it is just hold your own, right? Hold your water. Make sure that you do your job. Some of it is, hey, you have to win this matchup. This has to be owned by you. And the first one that we have down is the offensive tackles. Now, I know there's going to be a little bit of a question mark here, but the principle still remains the same. We don't know who it's going to be, but regardless of who it is, the Notre Dame offensive tackles have to win against Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, Brian.
They have to at least hold their own. I mean, that's the key. And I don't know who the tackles are going to be. I do know one of them, and that's Emil Wagner, and he's going to have to play a lot better this week than he's played the last 2 weeks. I thought Emil played better in the second half against Georgia. He struggled in the first half, and he struggled a lot against Penn State. I mean, now, in his defense, because of the injury to his arm, they lined up Abdul Carter against him every single snap that he was on the field.
Snap.
You know what I mean? And so somebody was like, Tosh and Emil struggled against Abdul Carter. And I'm like, Tosh never gave up a single pressure to Abdul Carter because he never lined up against Abdul Carter.
Right.
Those were all against Todd or against Emil. So you kind of are like, okay, I'll give him a little bit of a pass on that one because that guy's a dude, and you kind of like, okay, like, but he has not played great in the postseason, in my opinion. Emil has not. And he's going to have to step up and play better in this game. He gave up 5 pressures against Penn State. Gave up a sack and hit on the quarterback and 3 other pressures, according to Pro Football Focus. He's given up 8 pressures in the postseason. You can't have that. You got to play better than that. He's going to have to play better in this game. And he's going to be matched up against Jack Sawyer a lot. And so it's going to be a little bit more of a power game than he faced the speed game last week. And he's going to have to be on top of his game. And that includes the run game also. He's going to have to be on top of his game in the run game. So they're going to need Emil Wagner to be better. That's point number 1. I mean, just we can talk about, who's going to be the left tackle and all that. Look, one of the things that was good about Emil during the season, Trev, is he was their most consistent lineman. He has not been that in the postseason. No. The interesting thing is he's had some flashy plays, though. He's had some really punishing run blocks. I mean, I still go back to the block he had against Georgia it was one of the most well-executed QB counters I've ever seen in my life, just the way they blocked it up. It's like, that's teaching tape. It was like a 10-yard gain, but like that's teaching tape right there. It's like just perfectly how you draw it up. Emil's going to have to play better. And on the other side, in the battle against JT, you're going to need whoever the left tackle is to hold his own. And last year, I thought Notre Dame did pretty well against the Ohio State ends. And a big part of it was because you had a first and a second round draft pick going against those guys. You don't have those guys this year. Is it Tosh Baker? Tosh struggled. I went and counted. He had 5 pressures allowed in that game against Penn State. 4 of them were in the first half. He only played a quarter in the first half. Second half, I only had him down for 1 pressure in the second half. And he had another play where he got beat outside and he caught up, got on the guy, rode him out, and Riley stepped in and checked it down. Played a lot better. He's got to be that guy in the second half. And, I think part of it was you're getting caught up to the speed. You went from not playing to having to defend deny Dennis Sutton and Amin Vanover. It's not an easy deal, right?
No.
but I thought he responded well in the second half. You're going to need him to be on top of his game against JT. He's an elite player, and he's always been a guy that's at his best in big moments. He's always been that way. If it's Charles Jagasaw, okay, you're more talented there than you are with Tosh, but you're also a lot younger, more inexperienced, and a guy that's basically been on the bench for 3 months because of 4 months because of an injury. Yeah, September, October, November, December. I mean, 4 months because of an injury, and then most of August. So it's a okay, one guy's more experienced, maybe a little bit more consistent. The other guy's more talented, but you don't know what you're going to get. I don't know what they're going to go with, but whoever it is, that could be the big neutralizer in this game. If the guards and center play well and the receivers are coming off the line with urgency and Riley's willing to make hits, but he's constantly being pressured. I mean, if it's looking like the Curtis Rourke situation all over again, then it's going to be a long day. You're going to better hope your defense holds them to 10.
Yeah.
And that, you know what I mean? Like that's where we're at, Trev. If the tackles can just hold their own in the pass game and have some success in the run game, that's where the Notre Dame offense has a chance to be really good. I think this more than any other matchup is the one that's going to have the biggest outcome or the biggest impact on this game. We're going to talk about some other skill ones, but it really comes down to the O-line against the D-line, especially this battle. And look, the inside battle is going to be huge too. You know, Rocco and Coogan and Shrouth, or maybe it's Jagasaw, Coogan and Shrouth against Michael Hall and Ty Hamilton and those guys. And that's big too. But I think this is the one that the most concerns me, because this is the one where you just could completely nullify everything Notre Dame's trying to do if you get whooped there. I mean, you're trying to run outside zone, you're trying to run counter, you're trying to throw the football, and the ends can blow all of that up.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to factor in what the schematic ideal is for Ohio State. They want to win with their 4 guys up front. And if they're not able to do that, then they have to start bringing additional pressures, which is something that Mike Denbrock has shown at times he's been able to take advantage of. But yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, right? I mean, pressure up the middle's tough. It is. And guys like Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton, they can wreak havoc on your defense.
They got some guys. I mean, Hero Canu's been solid coming off the bench. You know, Tywone Malone is going to play a little bit. They got another kid whose name is escaping me right now. I was watching him against Michigan State last night, and you're like, this is a pretty good football player. I mean, they're not as good as the starters. They're not as good as Williams and Hamilton, but they're good football players. They're talented football players. So there's not this huge drop-off even when they're not on the field.
The second one that we have is...
Let me ask you this question, Trevor. Do you think that Notre Dame can hold up in this matchup?
Do I think they can?
Do you think they can, or do you think that they will? And do you think that they will? Of course they can, but do you think that they will?
If you want my honest answer, it's going to depend on who trots out there in the starting lineup. It does.
Explain it. Because that could go one of two ways. Because I have different thoughts on what I want the lineup to be. So I want to hear what you have to say about it.
To me, a lot of it revolves around the health of Rocco Spindler, man. It does. And we're talking about a kid that has literally given everything to this program. He graciously sat behind Billy Shrouth when Shrouth took over at right guard, and Rocco was a starter in all of 2020, or for the bulk of 2023. You know, he hurts his ankle and he battles and fights to get back every single week. But to me, I think we're starting to have a conversation around effectiveness. And on the play that Riley Leonard got evaluated for a concussion, Rocco got forklifted into the backfield and hurt his ankle on that same play because he wasn't able to anchor off of his bad ankle. And that's what gives me the most pause right now. And I know we talked about it yesterday. We don't put too much weight into the depth charts that are released. But if 50 trots out there, he needs to be at least 75%, because against Penn State, I don't even think he was that. And that's going to give me a lot of pause on if they're going to be able to hold up on the interior. You know, like that's a big question mark for me. If I'm being 100% honest, I don't put a whole lot of weight in who's trotting out there at left tackle because they're both healthy, because I think a factor has to be who's healthy enough to go. That's my biggest concern with Rocco. But I also don't believe that you can look at anything that Jagasaw did in the Penn State game and look at that and say, yeah, I think that there should be other players on the field ahead of him, no matter who it is, whether it's Rocco at right guard, whether it's Tosh at left tackle. It's where I'm at. And I don't think that you can look at what Jagasaw did and effectively say the best contribution that he can make to us is standing next to Joe Rudolph on the sideline. So that's why I say...
Would it shock you if he makes that decision, though?
Unfortunately, it would not shock me. But, you know,
It does make me nervous putting Tosh at left tackle, though. And here's why. Because they have not practiced him there at all until now. And here's the thing is like, are you only playing him at left tackle during if that's a consideration, are you only playing him at left tackle in bowl prep? Because here's the thing is if you're going to have him left tackle, you need to make a decision now. You know, he's the starter. He's getting all the reps. He needs every single rep possible.
Yeah.
If you're taking a guy that you've been playing at right guard for the last several months and just throwing him at left tackle in a week, I don't know how good that's going to be against these ends. That's my concern.
Yeah.
And you know, again, that's maybe more of an off-season conversation about what they did preparing him to be ready to play. But I mean, I also in defense, you knew Rocco was hurt and Anthony Knapp was fine. You know, you had that. Well, if Tosh is, I mean, you have Tosh there. So that's the reality. I don't know. I mean, and then how healthy can Rocco really get? He's going to go from getting no drive off his ankle to looking like regular season Rocco. Like, right. I have a hard time believing that. Part of me feels like the best thing to do in this game is to have Jagasol be your right guard and Tosh be your left tackle. But then if you're spending all week with Tosh playing left tackle and not getting right guard snaps, now you're screwed. Yeah. So you got to make a decision and go with it. And if you know, I love Rocco and I'd have him ready to go in case Tosh struggles and you got to move Charles out to left tackle or if Charles struggles or whatever. But I mean, he could do nothing. He could not move. He couldn't change direction off that foot. He couldn't get any drive off that foot. And it was putting him, I mean, the kid gave you everything he had in that game, everything he had, but he doesn't have anything left in the tank because of the ankle. Now, if that makes a miraculous healing over the next week, then great. Then put him at right guard and Jagasol left tackle. And now you've got a massive offensive line.
Yeah. That
you're throwing at an Ohio State defensive line that's not small by any stretch. It's not a small defensive line, but it's also not a huge one. Outside of Tyleik Williams, he's really your only like big guy. Yeah. You know, the rest of them, I mean, you know, Ty Hamilton's not small. He's not like Michael Hall. And the two ends are good-sized guys. But, you know, if you're talking about having Charles Jagasol at left tackle and Rocco, a healthy Rocco Spindler at right guard, you got a pretty big offensive line at that point in time, Trev. I'm actually going to go do the average size. But even if it's just you make the decision of just Jagasol and Tosh, man, you've got a pretty big offensive line.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Tosh from left to right, I mean, you'd be going 6'8", 325. Shrouth is a 6'5", 300-pounder. Coogan, 6'5", 3 something. You know, Jagasaw's 6'10". Yeah. Yeah. Jagasaw's 6'7", almost 330. Your smallest guy would be Emil at 6'6", 290.
Right.
I mean, it's a big offensive line, man. It's tough. But my one common denominator with the offensive line is I don't care where he starts. I don't like. Well, okay, I don't want to say I don't care because I think that could factor in, especially how they're handling this week of practice. I don't know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. I hope they're not doing something dumb where it's like, well, we'll do half the practice at right guard and half of it at left tackle, and we'll just kind of gauge it. I think you need to pick one and go with it. But at the end of the day, I don't care where it is. Jagasaw needs to be on the field. Yeah. Right. Like you watch the performance, and I don't think it's any mystery that once Rocco wasn't good to go and the ankle was just kind of toast for the rest of that game, I don't think it's any mystery that Jagasaw starts pulling a lot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that's a coincidence.
Second run of the game, he just takes the D tackle and drives him like 8 yards off the ball and then plants him. Rocco can't do that right now. He can't explode out of his stance that way, right? I mean, Rocco's never been a super explosive guy, but he's a very physical guy.
Yes.
But he just can't drive. He can't drive off that. Now, hopefully if he's going to start, he's healthy.
Yeah.
Like, hopefully. But it's a tough position to be in. Because here's the thing, like, if Anthony Knapp wasn't hurt, I'd be really nervous about your ability to protect the quarterback in this game. Probably even more so with either Jagasol or Tosh, because Tosh is still long enough that he can still get a body on you right outside. But what's interesting is losing your 294-pound true freshman, if it's Jagasol at right and Tosh at left, you're losing a little something in the run game. And that's kind of where you kind of need it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I thought Tosh battled in the run game. He just doesn't have the power that Knapp has. Knapp's just a lot more physical kid. So, if Rocco was healthy, I'd Rocco at right guard, Tosh at left tackle, and give him every rep.
Yeah.
But with him being done, it's going to be hard to do that, which makes me think, like, dude, just play Jagasol at the position he's been playing the last month. Let him keep getting better there. Put Tosh at left tackle. You know what he is. You can game plan for what he is. Like, you don't know what Tosh is going to give you at left tackle. Jagasol is going to be like, you know what Tosh is going to give you, right? Good and bad.
Yeah.
And you can game plan for that. But you know on the right side, you're going to be moving people. And you know up the middle, you're going to be able to move people. And that to me is a very important part of this.
Yeah.
Very important part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. The next matchup that we have on here, Brian, is Mitchell Evans, Love, and Greathouse versus the linebackers and the nickels.
Yeah.
And for good reason, right? I love that we included Jeremiah Love in this one because it's
you could put Aeneas in there. You could put, Yep.
Yeah. Because of what Jadon Blue did to Ohio State's linebackers in the wheel game, right? Those were their two touchdowns. Quinn Ewers' two passing touchdowns were to Jadon Blue, running back out of the backfield.
Got him twice on that.
Mm-hmm. In the same game. Yeah. Yeah. So, you go through and you look at this matchup, and a lot of it we did talk about when it was, the slot receivers and what the offense can do and the matchups that they have to win and tight ends and slots. But the point still stands, right? Like, that is where, especially with how Notre Dame is put together, you can't just assume that Bo Collins is going to go have the game of his career against Denzel Burke or Davison Igbinosun. We can't. I'm unfortunate as it is, because I love the potential. This will not be the one where I'm saying Chris Mitchell has his break.
It'd be nice. Hey, we were holding them for
sweet.
15 games. We were holding them back for 15 games because we knew that this one game against Ohio State we were going to.
To be fair, maybe we all have our salty Virginia Peanuts moment where, like, every single week it was the great one. And then guess who just ripped open the Orange Bowl? It was Jaden Greathouse. Right. Maybe.
Hey, my year-long prediction of this is the Jaden Greathouse breakout game came true. In the semifinals, maybe your Chris Mitchell one comes through in the championship game.
Hey, man, listen. If there was ever
Smith this thing, baby.
If there was ever a time, I would love it, man. Yeah. I would love it. But that matchup between, Mitchell Evans or even an Eli Raridan, Jaden Greathouse, or you can interchange that with Jaden Harrison, one of the Jadens, right? And either Jeremiah Love or Aeneas Williams. I would throw Price in there, but, like, they don't just use him in the pass game like that. Maybe they do this game. Who knows? But, yeah, a combination of them have to win against the linebackers and safeties, Brian.
Yeah, you do. I mean, this is where some of your chunk, and this is what we were kind of talking about earlier. This is where some of your chunk plays can come from against Ohio State. I mean, this is an area where I think they're vulnerable. We talked about Sonny Styles is a really athletic kid, physical kid. He gives you a lot of great effort, but he doesn't have great, let's say, spatial awareness. Trying to think, I don't want to make it sound too insulting, but he's not a good decision maker in space. And that wasn't just against Texas. Like, you watch enough film, you realize that's been kind of a problem all year. And you look at on the season, he's allowed 338 passing yards. He's allowed 338 receiving yards this season. Their number 2 guy in most completions and allowed. And he is, let's see, 4th in receiving yards allowed is Cody Simon. So you got 2 linebackers that are 1 and 2 on your team and allowing completions. Lathan Ransom's allowed 20 completions on 28 targets for 258 yards. Jordan Hancock, who's a good football player, has allowed 27 completions for 217 yards. There's some things you can get to there. So I think there's some opportunities there for this Notre Dame offense to go at them in those areas, not because Texas did or because Texas did that because that's where they are vulnerable and they had the playmakers to do it. That's the difference. And that's something that Notre Dame is going to need to take advantage of in this game. And when I talk about it, and it's not just, okay, I watched it happen against this team, and so I think it's going to happen against that team. No, I've seen it multiple times. Go watch the Michigan State game. their tight ends were very successful. They had 2 tight ends catch 3 passes for 53 yards. With the game still in doubt to some degrees, like 17-7, when a lot of those catches were made. We have seen teams be able to have success throwing to their tight ends, throwing to their running backs against Ohio State before this game. It wasn't just this game where that happened. Who was the leading pass catcher for Nebraska against Ohio State? It was Thomas Fadone, 4 catches for 55 yards, had a 33-yard gain in this game. You know, and I don't want to point to Tyler Warren because, you know, Nicholas Singleton, because they're different kind of cats. You know what I mean? But they had 10 catches for over 100 yards in the game, receiving in that game. And so when you look at it, Trev, that to me it's just, you break them down over the course of a season. That's just something teams have been able to have some success with, is thrown to their tight ends. Terrence Ferguson had 2 really good games against Ohio State. He had 4 for 62 in the first game they played. And he had, I think, 5 for 71, I think, in the second game they played. You know, he's their tight end. So this is like what you have to avoid as a coach. And I've worked with guys like this. Is you're breaking down film and you find, like, if you break down 5 games, you find that one play or that one matchup where a team beat them and you're like, we got to run this. I'm like, bro, that was a blown coverage. Like, that's not normally what they do. Teams have run that at them 10 times and it doesn't work. You look for patterns. What are some concepts that consistently give them trouble? What type of concepts? What type of matchups consistently give them trouble? When teams look at the Notre Dame defense, why do you think Penn State ran so much stretch and jet and pitch against Notre Dame? Because on film, that's one of the few things teams have done with some regularity against this Notre Dame defense. So they wrote it. And that's the thing here, is there's been several times where teams have been able to get some big plays out of this. And if you look at the Texas game, you know, Jadon Blue had his game, right? He had his performance. But the Wisner kid had 6 catches in that game as well for 42 yards. So, I mean, your 2 backs combined for 11 catches and 111 and 101 yards and 2 touchdowns against them. And then your tight end had 2 catches for 42 yards and got called for one of the worst taunting penalties I've ever seen in my entire life.
Don't even get me started on that one. That one was bad. Really, really bad. But to your point, Sonny Styles is definitely the guy to go after in the pass game, right? One of. And here's why. You go through and you look, and he's been targeted 56 times over the course of the season. He's allowed 40 receptions. So that is, he allows receptions on 71.4% of targets. That is ramped up significantly in the postseason. In the postseason alone, he's been targeted 24 times and has allowed 19 receptions. That's almost an 80% reception allowed rate. I guess I don't really know the proper terminology there, but he allows in the postseason
completion
receptions
percentage
on 80%.
allowed.
Yeah. And so that's one of those where it's just, you have to take advantage of those matchups. Tennessee was the first team to do it. Tennessee targeted him 7 times. He gave up 5 receptions. You know, Oregon, maybe it could be a lesson learned from their first matchup, or they saw something that Tennessee did, and Sonny Styles gave up 8 receptions on 9 targets. Same thing. Same thing against Texas, where he allowed his only touchdown of the season against Jadon Blue on one of those wheel routes, right? And so he gave up 6 receptions on 8 targets. He's one of the guys that's going to have to be targeted by the Notre Dame offense. And that, to your point, those are one of the matchups that we were talking about. I do believe Jeremiah Love wins that matchup in the pass game against Sonny Styles.
If they use him.
If they use him in the pass game the way that they should, right? And also if the first points hold up, right, where the tackles and the interior offensive line hold up. But those are going to have to be something like, I have to believe that Mike Denbrock sees that mismatch. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
and how do you get to that within the structure of who you are?
Totally.
Because you're not Texas offensively. You're not Oregon offensively, meaning it schematically. You do things differently than them. So you can't just go put something in that you don't know, you know what I mean? Or you haven't done that's not within structures you do formationally and things like that. You have to do it within who you are. And that's something we have seen at times. I mean, we saw it against Penn State. I mean, we know Mike Denbrock's willing to do it. It's just, it's going to have to be creative on how to do it. And you got to, the other thing too is you got to call it at the right time. You know, like, hey, I'm pretty sure we're going to get this look here. You know what I mean? So, all right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It has to be
loser. Idiot.
I was waiting.
Yeah. I tried to be nice. I'm not just trying to, because we've had a lot of Ohio State fans in our chat the last couple of days. I've been all the Ohio State fans, with the exception of that moron that I just banned and one earlier, like, I've really enjoyed y'all's contributions. You guys are talking balls. You guys think Ohio State's going to win? That's totally fine. Appreciate that. But yeah, so I've been trying to give them a little bit of grace, but now you're being an idiot, and you don't know how to spell or to use punctuation or to speak coherently. It's 4:07 in the afternoon. It's way too early to be hammered, bro. Come on now. Let's get back on track.
I was waiting. The final one that we had, and we've been hinting about it all show long, is the outside receivers will have to win certain matchups against Davis and Igbinosun and Denzel Burke. They don't have an Evan Stewart. They don't have a Tez Johnson, but you are going to have to find ways to win on the perimeter.
Sure.
And we've talked about what that looks like, right? Maybe more of the chain movers. I'm not expecting this is the game that Bo Collins just turns into a 4-3 wide receiver, right?
Yeah, I don't see him running by Denzel Burke on a bunch of go routes. Now, okay, so can you use some double moves? Can you use an out and up? Can you use a slant and go? Yeah, I mean, there's something. It's kind of like Penn State's corners. They're aggressive. They're going to bite on that first move, and because Notre Dame actually ran later in the game. I think it was it after his touchdown? It might have been after his touchdown. Notre Dame ran a sluggo with Jaden Greathouse outside, and he torched the guy. I have to find that clip for you, Trevor. But I think Riley got pressured or something like that. He couldn't see him. He got pressured or something. But I'm like, man, like I love that stuff. I've been begging for that stuff all year, and we saw it. I mean, and Ohio State does some of that, but you got to really sell the stutter and go. Like Notre Dame's guys, when they do stutter and go, they kind of like half butt it, and just like you got to slam them hips down and really get them to bite, and then go and use your hands to get a free release, and you're gonna have to do that. But you're not gonna just all of a sudden, like you said, Bo Collins isn't gonna all of a sudden look like Will Fuller. You're just not. And here's the thing, like Igbinosun, yes, he holds a ton, but if you can't run by him, then it's not going to get called as much. And I don't know that they have guys that can run by him. I don't know if they have guys that can put him in some of those binds. Now, there's some things maybe you could do formationally to try to say, hey, we're going to move some things around and try to get him on Jordan Faison and on some double moves and stuff, and then force him to grab. Cool, go for it. So we're not saying avoid throwing outside, because if you avoid throwing outside, there's more risk if you're just living over the middle all the whole time. I just think a lot of your chunks are going to be in some of those matchups, and some of those are going to be outside routes, so and part of it depends on what Ohio State does. If they play a lot of off coverage, which they have done at times, I could see Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jordan Faison catching 8, 9, 10 balls and averaging 8, 9 yards a catch. It's fine. Chain moving plays. The one guy that I would look to try to get into a downfield type of situation is Jordan Faison.
Yeah.
Because, on some corner posts or post corners or some double moves, because he's so quick that I could see you using him as sort of that let's attack Denzel Burke to the field.
Yeah.
Let's get him with this kind of move. If you can get him, I mean, we've seen Jordan Faison at times go boundary. We saw him do that last year. Get Davis and Igbinosun covering him, whether it's field, but however. When you get into some of those matchups, he's the guy that I think could maybe make some big plays. Get them in some catch and run situations. I think that's where you could be, but I just don't think you're going to your game plan is not going to be built around how can we get 4, 5, 6 chunk plays from our outside guys.
Right.
Not that theoretically or schematically it's not there. It's personnel-wise. I don't know that Notre Dame has the personnel to take advantage of that. If they had Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart, we'd be having a different conversation about how to go at them. They don't. Maybe they might next year. If they had Malachi Fields on the roster right now, we'd be having a different conversation.
Sure would. But no, I mean, winning on the outside, again, we've talked about it all show long. We're going to continue talking about it all week long. Winning in some of these matchups just looks a little different sometimes. And winning against Davis and Igbinosun is drawing a penalty sometimes. Legitimately, it is. Because he's the most penalized corner in all of college football right now. Not a knock. It's a statistic. You can look it up.
Honestly, it should be more.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
I mean, you could almost call him for holding every play. It's ridiculous. Like, it's absurd how much that guy holds.
Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. But they are susceptible to double moves. Now, I'm not saying you throw Jaden Thomas out there to start running a bunch of hitch and goes, but you have opportunities to win. I definitely feel like it's going to be more of a chain moving type of game from the outside. I would not be surprised if we saw a good amount of slot fades in this game with a Jordan Faison, with a Jaden Greathouse. I mean, shoot, the one slot fade, the two slot fades that I've seen Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan were like go on were both touchdowns. One of them was against Florida State for Mitchell Evans. The other one was against USC for a touchdown for Eli Raridan.
And they ran a corner route for a touchdown with Mitchell Evans as well against USC.
They did. So it's going to be it's
similar to slot fade, how you're attacking a team. It's just a different throwing angle for the quarterback.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of concept. Now, here's the thing. Riley's going to have to read that well. Because there's times if against a slot fade, they'll just run that corner underneath it and try to kind of get you into throwing it. Sure. Riley's got to read it. Like, don't pre-snap read it and then don't look at the corner at all. Pre-snap read it. Get your eyes in that corner. If he bails, don't be afraid to bring that check down to Jordan Faison. Don't be afraid to get that check down to Chris Mitchell. That's going to be a big key as well for me, Trev, is the slot fades are there, but they know it's there. Right. They've seen him hurt it. And when they play teams that do a lot of slot fade, that's what they do. They kind of bracket it with their corner. He'll open up, put his butt to the sideline. And when he reads that slot fade, he'll just keep rolling right underneath it and make a play on the ball. If you see that, bring that check down. Get your eyes on the slot fade. So I said earlier, look at the corner. It's not what I mean. Get your eyes on the slot fade, but you've got to see that corner. And if he's going, come right now down to the hitch route. And minimum worst case scenario, he catches the ball, gets tackled for a 5-yard gain. Best case scenario, if that corner's still running and it's Jordan Faison or Chris Mitchell, they got some room to run. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be key for Riley's read it. And I wouldn't be surprised if they run it some more out of trips. We've seen them do a lot of 2x2 slot fades. He did a lot of 3x1 slot fades at LSU. In this game, when you're talking about being against those linebackers in coverage, I could see some more 3x1 slot fades in this game too, because now you got that little option route number 3, where if they're bringing pressure out of 3x1, you got Mitchell Evans running a little quick option route there. Now you're in something. And I think that also could impact how they defend it, because I could see them out of 3x1 maybe playing that cornerback off a little bit more to try to undercut it. And then you're just picking them apart with option routes and hitch checkdowns. And then they start playing more aggressively. Then you go over top on it. Yeah. But I could see some of that a little bit too.
No, absolutely. There's going to be things that Denbrock, I believe, kind of has in his back pocket. I guess the hypothetical green mystical playbook, if you will, for some of those who believe that exists. But at the end of the day, Riley's going to have to be dealing, man. I mean, we can talk about winning at the line of scrimmage for the slot receivers, for the tight ends, for the running backs when they're in the passing game. Pass protection is going to have to hold up. Riley Leonard's going to have to be facilitating at a very, very high level. Because, again, there's going to be moments in this game where Riley's going to have to make a play. That has been true in most of the playoff games. Like, the Indiana game was well in hand, but again, you had to step up in the pocket, avoid pressure, and hit Jordan Faison in stride to really seal that game. You know what I mean? To really shut the door in Indiana. I think it's self-explanatory against Georgia what Riley Leonard had to do. I mean, at times in that game, he became the entire offense, So
you need all of that against Ohio State.
Yes, you need a little bit of everything. You need the second half passing from Penn State. You need the mobility from Georgia, the poise from all three, the ability to overcome adversity from all three. So
I do think if you can run the ball on them, you can have some of those downfield opportunities like they had against Indiana.
Yeah.
I do.
I do too.
Much easier said than done, though.
100%. 100%. All right, Brian. We good? Super chats. We got a super chat from Andrew Rhodes. Thank you, Andrew. The theme for Notre Dame's opponents in the playoffs have been great defensive lines. Notre Dame is up for the challenge. Go Irish.
Well, man, you're spot on about one thing, dude. This is definitely a battle-tested offensive line.
Man.
I mean, Indiana, Georgia, and Penn State all have great defensive lines. Now, I'm not trying to get into an argument about whose is better. Some people may think Georgia's is better. Depends on what your favorite style of play is. Some people may think that Penn State's is better. Some people may think that Ohio State's is better. Whatever. They're all really good.
Oh, yeah.
They're all really good. And you're going to be tested. You know, you've been prepared for this game by who you've played in your last 3 games. You've got to be on top of your game.
Yeah, man. I mean, the fact that Notre Dame up to this point, their offensive line has seen Mikael Kamara, CJ West, Jalen Walker, Nazir Stackhouse. They've seen Abdul Carter. They've seen
Michael
Zane
Williams.
Durant, Michael Williams. They've seen Dennis Sutton. Like, I mean, it's not like they faced
Durant. Did you mention him?
Yep.
I mean, he's a dude. Yeah, they faced some dudes.
It's not like they've seen nobody, and now they face
Right.
Jack Sawyer and JT. Right? I mean, this is a very battle-tested O-line.
Yeah.
Good point, Andrew.
Yeah, good stuff.
Super chat from AST12321. Thank you for the super chat. Watching the Texas game, I noticed a few times when pass rushers got home because of Ewers' immobility. Hopefully, Riley makes things harder on them.
I think so. I think also having a guy like Riley changes your play calling near the goal line. I mean, if you don't think you can run the ball right at him with your running back, you've got other options. You can then make your running back a lead blocker, and you can run your quarterback. Texas doesn't have that option.
Right.
Plus, Texas is a I'm going to use the word finesse. I was going to say soft, but I mean finesse running game. And again, I use that word specifically because I'm not trying to bash the players for, you're soft. That's what they're taught. That's what their scheme is. It's a finesse running game.
Yeah.
That's why Georgia whooped them. That's why they couldn't run the ball on Ohio State. That's why they get into a 1st and goal. They run once and then just give up on it.
Yeah.
And run a toss play despite being outnumbered and out leveraged outside.
That was crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, I in theory, I have no problem running a toss there. If you get the right look and you get them leveraged and you're in 14 personnel and you can get them inside, run that toss and out run into the end zone. I'm cool with that. Yeah. But you ran that kind of out of like a spread for me. You had like a receivers out there. And they had 4 guys to your 3, and they were out playing outside leverage on the outside. It made no sense to run that play against that specific look.
Right.
And, it cost them the game. I really believe that because now you're behind the 8 ball. Now you have to throw for 2 downs. And that's not where you want to be against Ohio State. You do not want to be in a I have to throw situation.
Nope.
But in Notre Dame gets in that situation, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're going to run Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard for 3-4 plays in a row.
Literally.
And you're in a little better place. And if they stop you, tip your cap to them and say, you guys are better. But no, he's right on this. I mean, and look, there's going to be times where the tackles are going to get beat.
Yeah. There's
going to be times when the interior guys get beat. Like, you are not shutting down this Ohio State defensive line. You just need Riley in those instances to get the ball out properly, get the check downs like he did against Indiana, steal some yards, get those 3, 4, 5 yard gains. And there's times you have to make people miss. I mean, I was talking earlier in the show about it, and you saw it against USC, but you saw it against Penn State too. There was a couple times where Penn State brought a free rusher off the slot, and just nobody blocked him, and Riley just made a miss. One time he threw the ball away, but it's like you went from -6 or 7 to 0. That's a win.
That's huge.
And I think of the USC game where they brought a corner fire from his backside. He sees it, and he waits, and then spins out of it, and then runs for 6 yards.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Quinn Ewers isn't doing that. With all due respect, Curtis Rourke's not doing that. I don't know that Nico has the experience. I think Nico could eventually get there, but he's still a young guy that doesn't have the experience that Riley has. And I don't know that Dylan Gabriel was going to do that in that same way. Dylan Gabriel is more of if the rush lanes are, if you're undisciplined in the rush lanes, which Ohio State can be at times, he's going to step up and make you pay.
Totally.
Riley's going to have to do that as well in this game as a passer. If they over pursue, you got to go.
Mm-hmm.
And as Jay Henry points out, Notre Dame's been playing really good defensive lines all year. I mean, first game of the year, Texas A&M. Georgia Tech's got a really good defensive line.
Yeah.
Louisville's got a really good defensive line. This isn't the first time. Like, they didn't get the playoffs. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's good D lines out there. Oh my, what are we gonna do?
Right.
They've been doing this all year, man. They've been playing good D lines all year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, heck, even Miami of Ohio has a pretty good D line. They're like really good MAC kids, but like what's his name? The Brian, is it Ubo? I forget his last name, but he's a really good player that they had. They had a D tackle as a pretty good player.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of That's kind of where I'm at on that one. But yeah, I mean, Riley presents a different challenge for Ohio, just like he's done everybody else. It doesn't mean Notre Dame's going to win because of him, but he presents, you have to defend Ugwu. Thank you, Ryan. He presents a completely different challenge than what the other quarterbacks they faced presents.
Yeah. No, I said it earlier in the show too. Ewer's gap escape and his escapability in the pocket was really bad against Texas. I'm not saying that he was going to be able to break off any runs, but I mean, it was evident that the second that he got pressured, he just accepted the fact that he was going to be sacked. Outside of the one where he stepped up and then like kind of flipped it underhand to Wisner. Yeah, literally outside of that play. But the second
there's still Notre Dame fans as of last night saying that they want him at quarterback. And I'm like, oh my God.
Ewers?
Yes, as of last night. I'm like, dude, I mean, come on. What are we doing here?
No comment.
First of all, the next time he plays a full season will be the first time he plays a full season.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm glad he declared. I'm like, okay, finally we can be done with this stupid bullcrap rumors about Quinn Ewers. But man, oh man, oh man. But he's just, you know, and that's why when you look at Notre Dame's quarterbacks for next year, I mean, Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr they're not Riley Leonard, but they're not that either. You know what I mean? Like they're not what Quinn Ewers was in that game either.
No.
So yeah, I mean, I just think I kind of feel bad for the kid. He's had a lot of pressure on him, but he just looked mentally beat in the playoff for most part. He kind of came alive in the fourth quarter against Arizona State, but those last two games, there were just some stretches where you're like, that kid just don't want to get hit anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, once he got pressured against Ohio State, the second he stepped up in the pocket, he stopped looking downfield. He just tucked the football and just waited to be sacked. There was no attempt. Super chat from Patrick James. Thank you, Patrick. If Notre Dame wins, do you think people will finally come around, or will it be Will Howard sucks and Ryan Day has to go? I can answer yes to both questions.
Well, I mean, yeah, look, there's going to be some crazy fans that are like, Will Howard sucks and Ryan Day has to go. You're going to have that, but those are not the normal fans. I have to think that most Ohio State fans, they're not going to be happy if they lose Notre Dame at all. And you can see some of the people in the chat think, they're playing like Purdue this next week. Most aren't that way. Most Ohio State fans are going to be very disappointed losing to Ohio State, just like Notre Dame fans will be very disappointed losing to Ohio State, or Ohio State fans will be disappointed with them losing Notre Dame, just like Notre Dame fans will be disappointed losing Ohio State because it's a rival. It's not a frequent rival, but it's a rival. You recruit against each other. Your fan bases don't necessarily like each other, all that type of stuff. It's a rival in that regard, even though it's not we've played a million times like, Michigan or Michigan State and Purdue with Notre Dame. But I don't think the majority of fans or analysts will be doing that. They'll say Ohio State didn't play well. If they played 10 more times, that Ohio State would win 9 of them or 8 of them. Like, you'll hear a lot of that. If Notre Dame wins, you'll hear, well, yeah, Seth McLaughlin wasn't out. That's why the D-line played really well. You'll get all the excuses. But a lot of people are going to be like, this is a really good Notre Dame team. They are. There's already people kind of coming around. Win or lose, I think the narrative has changed to a degree with a lot of people. I do. And Steven said, unless we win 42-10, I actually think winning 42-10 is worst case scenario for Notre Dame from a perception standpoint. Because I think that's when people then dismiss, well, maybe Ohio State just wasn't that good. Like if Ohio State blows out Notre Dame, it's like, this is a great Ohio State team and Notre Dame's not that good. They'll do both. If Notre Dame blows Ohio State out, I do think a lot of people will be like, well, yeah, maybe Ohio State wasn't as good as we think. Maybe that's what I think. They shouldn't. I think they should say, this is a really good freaking Notre Dame team, and Ohio State had a bad day. And that happens sometimes. I mean, Denver Broncos got the 2 Super Bowls where they got absolutely blown out. Does that mean for the whole year, they weren't a great team? Of course they were. That's why they were playing in the Super Bowl. But you'll see some of that. But I almost think like winning a battle is the best thing for Notre Dame. And if you do beat them by multiple touchdowns, Trevor, it's just got to be Ohio State did some good things, but Notre Dame was just rolling. Mm-hmm. Ohio State just couldn't stop him. It wasn't because they had like 2 pick sixes and fumbles and you know what I mean? Like we saw that against Georgia. I mean, you and I watched that game. Notre Dame outplayed Georgia. Yeah. Clearly outplayed Georgia. But it's, well, this play. Outside of that, Georgia wins. we watched a different game then. You know what I mean? But that's like what Penn State people are doing. Well, we only lost because of this, this, and this. Like, well, you got outgained by almost 100 yards. You got outgained and outscored. I don't know what you're talking about. That's just my 2 cents.
No, I'm with you. Listen, Patrick, I think you're going to hear a little bit of everything from every different angle. And the thing that I've learned, especially about working this job and what I've been doing with Irish Breakdown since, really since the start of the season full time in October, is that you hear a little bit of everything. And the minority of most fan bases are typically the most loud. And unfortunately, it doesn't speak for all of them, right? Or fortunately, it does not speak for all of them. But you're going to hear a little bit of everything, right? Like, we're talking about a fan base that lost one game and wanted to fire the head coach and run Will Howard out of town, to then in their next game, they won, and then nobody could beat them. Like, that's like, it's
right. Like, something that Stephen B just said in the chat. He's like, people are pretending like this Ohio State team is unbeatable, and we're just ignoring the fact that they've literally lost twice.
Yeah, they lost a little bit outside of like a month ago.
Right. To a team that's not very good.
Right. I mean, if there should be a narrative of a team that's just not beatable right now, it's Notre Dame, because they haven't lost since September 7th. But
right, exactly.
Right, but nobody wants to go there.
And they shouldn't. They shouldn't. And my point is, both of these teams are really good.
Yeah, both of these teams are also beatable.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, it's Patrick. That's just what you're going to hear on either side, man. It's just what it's going to be. So
what the narrative should be is, these are the 2 best teams of college football.
100%. And
they played like it. Mm-hmm. And the teams that wins is the best team in college football. That should be the narrative. Mm-hmm. And I think there will actually be a decent amount of that. I do. If this is a good game, I think you're going to get a lot of that. There's always going to be the clickbait people. Guys, that's just the world we live in now. Why is somebody from On3 doing a video about Quinn Ewers and Notre Dame? Clicks. Because he knows, and On3 knows, that you all will watch it. And that I will retweet it and put them on blast for it. They know that. So that's why they do it. There's always going to be that. But I think a lot of the good analysts are going to look at that and be like, Ohio State's legit, but Notre Dame's going to be a problem.
100%.
No matter if it's a close game. Or Notre Dame's legit and Ohio State's going to be a problem for people. These 2 teams are here to stay. That's what I think there will actually be a decent amount of people from. I do. I think the way the path that got Notre Dame here, as long as it's a close game, you're going to have a lot of people saying, now, is Reese Davis going to praise Notre Dame? No. And I like J.D. Piquel. He does a really good job. He's one of the few On3 people I like. But what I'm saying is, you're only doing that video to get clicks on it. You don't actually believe that Notre Dame is going to take Quinn Ewers, or that Quinn Ewers is going to go Notre Dame. You're just doing it to get clicks. That's my point. But what I'm saying is, I do think there's been a lot of people that are starting to realize that Notre Dame's actually really good.
Yeah.
And if they lose a close game to Ohio State, they're going to be like, hey, they're really good.
Yeah.
And they're not there yet, which is true, but they're really good, and they're going to be a problem.
Yeah, because for the majority, they're going to see that Notre Dame on this stage played a close game. Like, at the end of the day, like, if the game is close, I think the narrative will start to change regardless. They won 2 New Year's Six Bowls within a week of each other after not doing it for 30 years. They get to the national championship game where the narrative is still Notre Dame gets blown out in these types of games, even though they won 2 of their previous big games in the Orange Bowl and the Sugar Bowl, right? But if Notre Dame plays this team in Ohio State that is perceived to be this just unbeatable Avengers level threat of a team, then if they play them close, win or lose, I think the narrative starts to change, right? Like, I believe that it already has started. I do. But, a win obviously kind of pushes it over the edge.
Yeah. I mean, you listen to David Pollack talk about Notre Dame in the playoff. You listen to Booger McFarland, Greg McElroy. Like, those are guys that in the past have not been overly positive about Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And honestly, sometimes for good reason. You listen to them talk about Notre Dame now, and I still think some of them are missing how athletic this team is. I still think that is being missed.
Yeah, it is.
But they respect the team. You can see that they respect the team.
Yeah.
You can see they respect Marcus Freeman in the talent that they have, even though I still think they're selling short the athleticism Notre Dame has at several positions. There's even some former Notre Dame players who like to put out content who do that. You tell me Notre Dame's linebackers don't run fast and stuff like that. Literally had this conversation. You know who I'm talking about. Literally had this conversation about a month ago. But you're seeing a lot of good analysts are coming around. And as long as it's like, if they get blown out, it's going to be right back to square one. Yeah. That's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So I think that there's maybe more honest analysts out there than I sometimes give them credit for. But if you think about it, a lot of them have become that since they've left ESPN.
Yeah.
And they're doing their own thing now. Or ESPN people who have shows on the side, they're more praiseworthy of Notre Dame in that setting than they are in some of the ESPN segments. I've noticed that a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think depending on how Notre Dame performs here, especially on defense, like offense, sure, but especially on defense with how highly regarded Ohio State's offense is for good reason, I think that's when the athletic narrative is going to start turning the corner. Because right now it's Notre Dame is just, we don't really know how, but they've earned our respect because Marcus Freeman's a great guy and he gives great speeches, but we don't really know how, but they just refuse to lose. And it's like, because they have really good players. Like, can we just, but I think depending on how they play and perform against Ohio State, that narrative will start to change. It's going to start turning head. Even though he's done it for most of the season when he's played, they're like, this Leonard Moore kid's keeping up with Jeremiah Smith.
Right.
Like, hey, this Bryce Young kid just worked whoever on a few plays this game. Like, hey,
boy, those linebackers can really run.
Right. Jaden Osbury can fly. That number 4 on defense for Notre Dame can really move. Like, he's done that all year, but he wears blue and gold. So you're just assuming he's just,
and he's not a starter.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. But you're just assuming because he wears blue and gold that he's just a hard-nosed, gritty, intelligent guy that is just always in the right spot at the right time because he has a 4.7 weighted GPA. Like, it is what it is. But no, I think the narrative has already started to change, Patrick.
Agree. Now, Trev, that'll do it.
All righty. Thank you for the catch because I'm really happy that we did not miss out on those super chats. So
yeah, I was ready. For him, buddy.
Well, guys, that's going to do it for us here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Thanks for being with us. Just a hair under about 3.5 hours here covering the Ohio State defense versus the Notre Dame offense. But not to worry, we will be back tomorrow with more coverage of this matchup. We're going to be back here tomorrow at 1 o'clock again, and we're going to talk about why we believe Notre Dame has a chance to win this game. And we're also going to talk about some of the potential concerns that we have. And we're going to take a deep dive into the areas that they're going to need to continue to win in, why we feel confident about Notre Dame in this matchup, and then obviously the areas that if we don't get the outcome that we want to as fans, why we believe that could be. So is IB Nation Sports Talk going live here tonight too?
I believe so. Unless the women have a basketball game, I'd have to check on that one.
Okay.
But I believe so, yes.
Well, either way, as long as you have that notification bell hit, you're going to know whenever we go live here at Irish Breakdown. Also, be sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. You guys have seen it. We have other sports fans, not just Notre Dame fans here in the chat. Anybody that loves to talk ball are more than welcome because these are two guys right here that love to sit down and just chop it up with people and talk football, right? The best way to support what we do, and you can see that content on a daily basis, is if you subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's where we live every single day. We talk football, we talk Notre Dame, we talk matchups, transfer portal, recruiting, all the above is happening at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Brian. I'm Trevor Trowbridge, and we will see you back here tomorrow on the Irish Breakdown podcast.